Chapter 624. Novel, Chapter 664. Novel 100,000 years. The galaxy regained its peace after that. If it were not for the fact that the galaxy had changed a lot compared to before and was almost beyond recognition, no one would think that something abnormal had happened here before. Time passed by slowly. 1 year, 10 years, 100 years, in the blink of an eye, 100,000 years had passed. 100,000 years was already an extremely long period of time for a civilization, but for the entire universe and the entire era, it was just a blink of an eye. After 100,000 years, the star system had regained its balance. Countless stardust gathered at the location of the dozen or so planets that had been crushed back then, forming a belt of meteorites that revolved around the star like a halo. The planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined had also undergone great changes over the years. The atmosphere that had been thinned by the pillar of fire had been recondensed and returned to its original thickness. Moreover, because it was recondensed, there were many changes compared to the previous atmosphere. Unknowingly, there were many more components that were suitable for the birth of living beings. However, 100,000 years was still too short for the birth of living beings. Therefore, although the environment of the planet had changed a lot compared to before, no living beings had been born. The original 3 satellites of the planet had already become one. The trajectories of the 3 satellites had been changed by the black hole in space. After 100,000 years, this change in trajectory caused the 3 satellites to collide at a certain moment, collapse and reform, turning into a satellite that was 1 size larger than any of the previous satellites. It continuously revolved around the planet. Of course, it was impossible for this satellite to contain all the matter of the 3 satellites. In fact, apart from the matter contained in the satellite that currently existed, most of the other matter fell into the planet. The remaining small part was thrown into the meteorite belt around the star due to the attraction of the star. This change made the planet more stable, and the changes on the planet due to the influence of the satellite's gravity became more concise. This day was 1 day after Luo Fan had been sent flying 10,000 years ago. Suddenly, somewhere in the galaxy, an indescribably strong attractive force was generated out of thin air, crazily attracting the endless free energy and all kinds of common or rare yuan qi in the void of the universe. The speed at which these energies condensed was astonishing. Even the space in the void showed faint traces under the impact of the friction of these countless energies, forming a faintly discernible vortex that surrounded a certain part of the star system. That was the location of the planet that Luo Fan had refined. At this moment, earth-shattering changes were occurring on the planet. The countless forces that gathered contained various water-based forces. After these water-based forces entered the planet's atmosphere, they caused some subtle changes to the planet's atmosphere. In an instant, countless amounts of water vapor began to condense in the clouds of the planet through various unimaginable methods. The speed at which it condensed was incomparably fast. In just a few hours, a huge dark cloud had formed that covered almost the entire surface of the planet. As time passed, the dark cloud grew thicker and thicker. In the end, a thunderclap shook the entire planet. The endless water vapor in the dark cloud was finally thick enough to break free, turning into monstrous rain that fell from the sky. The planet finally welcomed its first rain in billions of years since it was formed. The rain became heavier and heavier, covering the sky and covering the earth. It almost completely covered the entire surface of the planet. When living beings looked at the planet from the outside world, they could only see a thick black expanse and a boundless curtain of water. This planet was originally extremely dry, like an oven. In this torrential rain, the entire planet was like a creature that had been thirsty for countless years. It began to crazily absorb the rainwater, continuously fusing it into its body. The deepest part of its body began to become moist and satisfied. The rain seemed endless. It was long and endless, covering the sky and earth, making the entire planet seem as if it had been enveloped in this boundless curtain of rain since ancient times. This planet was 10 times larger than Earth, but it was far from being comparable to the only planet in the Kiliacosm galaxy. In just a year, the entire surface of the planet had been soaked in endless rain. Of course, this was only on the surface. The internal structure of the planet was simple yet complicated, rough yet mysterious. Rainwater was naturally unable to completely soak the entire planet. Although there was rainwater accumulating inside, it only gradually formed underground water. It did not affect the internal structure of the planet in the slightest. As the rain soaked the surface of the planet, the force that continuously drew the rainwater into the planet disappeared. The rainwater began to flow and accumulate on the surface of the planet. Following this change, some of the low-lying areas of the planet gradually formed lakes and rivers. It could be predicted that if the rain continued like this, there would be a day when the entire planet would become a boundless ocean. And this, even if the rain was so astonishing that it covered the sky and earth, could not be achieved in just 1 or 2 years. During this process, the attraction force produced by the entire planet towards the various powers did not weaken at all. Instead, it continued to strengthen. It looked as if some kind of huge and powerful creature was slowly waking up from its slumber, slowly moving its body and recovering its vitality. As the rivers and lakes gradually formed, other changes began to appear on the surface of the planet. Among the various powers that had gathered, some of the lightning attribute powers had finally accumulated to a limit. Streaks of them struck down from the dark clouds, covering the sky and earth. They were mixed in with the rain, causing the entire planet, which originally only had the sound of rushing water, to become extremely noisy. The rumbling sounds shook the heavens and earth. These bolts of lightning were different from the lightning that was formed from friction between the dark clouds. Back then, the bolts of lightning were formed from friction. They were essentially just a form of movement. At this moment, these bolts of lightning were condensed from boundless lightning attribute power. Finally, because they were too dense and there was too much of them, they turned from nothingness into reality. Finally, they struck down and appeared in the universe. These bolts of lightning were essentially a form of power. This power was extremely mysterious and contained endless vitality. It could cause the entire atmosphere of the planet and the surface of the planet to undergo all sorts of unimaginable changes, causing the world to gradually be filled with more and more vitality. The accumulation of the power of lightning was much more difficult than the power of water. Therefore, these bolts of lightning came in waves. When they accumulated to a certain level, they would start to explode and fall onto the surface of the planet. Some would shatter a mountain, some would open up a deep valley, some would evaporate a lake, and some would cause the substances in the lake to undergo some sort of strange combination. When this wave of lightning was emptied, it would start to accumulate again, waiting for the next explosion of power. At the same time, it would also give the planet a chance to digest the various changes caused by this wave of lightning. The speed at which the countless powers gathered on the planet became faster and faster. The time it took for the lightning to accumulate naturally became shorter and shorter. Therefore, the time between the waves of lightning also became shorter and shorter. At first, it would take an entire year to accumulate, but after 100 years, it would only take a few days for an overwhelming wave of lightning to be produced on the entire planet. After 100 years, more and more water sources appeared on the surface of the planet. Finally, many low-lying areas of the planet were connected, forming a medium-sized ocean. However, it finally formed an environment suitable for the birth of life. The birth of living things required vitality, power, opportunity, and stability. The huge changes that happened on the surface of the planet in the past 100 years were not only because of the endless rain and lightning, but also because of the intense changes caused by the condensation of various other powers. The power of water condensed, producing endless rain. The power of lightning condensed, producing endless vitality and endless destruction. The power of Earth condensed, adding many substances that originally did not exist on the inside of the planet. The power of metal condensed, adding many metals that originally did not exist on the inside of the planet, causing the magnetic poles of the planet to continuously strengthen. Wind attribute, wood attribute, fire attribute. The condensation of any kind of power would cause some kind of change to the planet. Some of these changes were beneficial to the birth of life, but some would cause indescribable damage to the birth of life. Therefore, even if there were embryonic life forms on the surface of the planet, it would be difficult for them to grow, truly take shape, and truly reproduce. Only a stable environment suitable for the birth of life could allow the embryonic life forms to have enough time to grow after they were born and truly reproduce. Even a lake would find it difficult to provide such a stable environment. After all, the changes on the surface of the planet were too intense. The lake was still too small, and it could easily be stirred by the changes. It could even completely disappear. How could it provide a stable environment? Only the appearance of the ocean could provide such a stable environment. The ocean was countless times larger than a lake. Even the ocean that had just appeared on the surface of the planet occupied 1/1000th of the surface of the planet. Such a large area was naturally insignificant compared to the entire planet, but it was enough to resist the changes in the outside world. It could allow the depths of the ocean to remain in an unchanging and stable environment, making it difficult for the outside world to truly affect the depths of the ocean no matter what. And this was the most suitable environment for the birth of life. However, the environment was suitable. After all, it was only an environment. Truly giving birth to life required great opportunities and a long wait. If the changes on the planet stopped, it would take at least millions of years or tens of millions of years for life to truly be born in the depths of the ocean. However, it was clear that the changes on the surface of the planet could not stop. Instead, they continued to accelerate and strengthen as time passed. And this caused the time needed for the birth of life in the depths of the ocean to continuously shrink. In just a short 100 years, the most primitive single-celled life was finally born in the depths of the ocean after a shocking lightning strike. The moment this life was born, the entire planet suddenly shook. It was as if an invisible will had suddenly turned around, as if the entire planet had come to life in an instant. Following this change, the dark clouds that covered the surface of the entire planet were instantly blown away by an invisible force. In an instant, they completely collapsed and turned into endless water vapor that integrated into every inch of the entire planet's atmosphere. The entire planet was instantly enveloped in an unimaginably dense fog. The lightning that was originally covering the sky and earth turned into countless tiny electric arcs in an instant, and together with the fog, they enveloped the entire surface of the planet. Similarly, the various other types of power also underwent similar changes. They all seemed to have dispersed in an instant. The attraction force generated by the entire planet skyrocketed by countless times in an instant. The originally blurry and faintly discernible vortex that appeared around the planet had now condensed into a true form. The huge vortex turned the planet into a black hole. It even began to attract the meteorite belts around the star, causing many small meteorites to float towards the planet. They were about to enter the vortex and rush straight into the planet through the vortex. This vortex was so astonishing that the amount of energy and power that it gathered was naturally earth-shattering. However, these powers were no longer piled up on the surface of the planet like before. Instead, they began to rush straight into the planet through some extremely mysterious channel. After passing through layers of strange changes, they fused into a certain location in the center of the planet. The fusion of these powers caused the interior of the planet to gradually undergo inexplicable changes. The entire planet began to tremble slightly, as if some kind of living being was shaking its body. The central star constantly emitted boundless light and heat. after 200 years of changes because of the endless dark clouds covering it, the temperature on the surface of the planet had dropped a lot compared to before. Although it was still around 100 degrees Celsius in the secular unit, it was still not suitable for ordinary people to survive. However, it was enough for some living beings with stronger heat resistance to survive. At this moment, without the cover of the dark clouds, sunlight shone directly into the surface of the planet. The heat generated was naturally unimaginable. Under this heat, the fog that filled the surface of the planet began to gradually evaporate, condensing into dark clouds in the atmosphere again. However, these dark clouds were formed because of the sunlight and the evaporation of water vapor. Naturally, they could not be evenly distributed. The dark clouds that were formed were not as overwhelming as before, directly covering the entire surface of the planet. Instead, they came in patches and patches. Some places were not covered by clouds at all, and some places were covered by dark clouds that were as dark as ink, covering the sky and the sun. Among them, there was a huge dividing line that divided the entire planet into two sides. On the side facing the star, dark clouds appeared in most places, while on the side facing the star, the fog dissipated very little. However, due to the change in the atmosphere, a lot of the fog at the border flowed towards the side where the sun shone, causing the fog to gradually thin. When the dark clouds accumulated to a certain extent, they naturally turned into rain and fell, and there was even the rumbling of thunder. However, these were only natural phenomena. They were no longer condensed from the power of water in the past. Instead, they were emitted by the heat of the sun, and they had already turned into natural weather. These were no longer interrupted. The power that had completely dispersed the endless dark clouds around the entire planet no longer appeared, allowing these evolutions to continue. On the surface of the planet, the area of the ocean had increased to nearly 1/20th of the planet, which was more than 50 times larger than the 1,000th of the original. However, it made the planet even more beautiful. So it's been as long as 100,000 years. At this moment, a faint sigh spread throughout the entire planet. This sigh seemed to be formed by the combination of every mountain rock, every bit of soil, every drop of rain, and every bit of power on the planet. It was as if the entire planet itself was sighing. With this sigh, the planet slightly distorted, and a crystal-clear light drilled out from a mountain peak, condensing into the phantom of a giant that was tens of thousands of feet tall in the void. This giant phantom was extremely huge, but its figure was very illusory. There was no power inside it, and it seemed to be purely condensed from will. Looking at the appearance of this giant, it was impressively Luo Fan. This giant was obviously the manifestation of the will of Luo Fan's spiritual doppelganger that had merged with the planet. At this moment, after more than 100,000 years of improvement, Luo Fan's spiritual doppelganger had completely refined the planet and reached the level of perfectly driving the entire planet. At this moment, the planet was his body, and his body was the planet. Because of this change, Luo Fan's will naturally merged with the will of the planet, and naturally grew to a shocking level. This growth made it even more troublesome for him to compress and condense his will. Although he could still directly compress his body to the size of a normal human, it was too troublesome. It was easier and more convenient to compress his body to its current height of 10,000 feet. Although his body of 10,000 feet was huge compared to the average scale, it was extremely small compared to the scale of this planet. It could even be said to be insignificant. Therefore, the image that Luo Fan's will manifested at this moment was so tall. Moreover, because although the will of the planet was huge, it was somewhat scattered, so when Luo Fan's will merged with it, it naturally became somewhat scattered as well. This caused the manifestation of the will that was tens of thousands of feet tall to appear so illusory. Chapter 6:25. Essence, I didn't expect it to take 100,000 years, Luo Fan thought. He understood how long it had been since he had merged with the planet. After understanding, he raised his hand and grabbed. The space in front of him twisted slightly, and a vague whirlpool suddenly formed. The whirlpool was mysterious and gave off an indescribable attractive force. The attractive force was very mysterious. It did not affect any matter, power, or yuan qi in the surroundings at all. It did not even disturb the flow of air in the surroundings. It was as if a strange whirlpool-shaped matter had suddenly appeared here. However, the attractive force was real. This force of attraction directly merged into the void, and through some kind of incomparably mysterious channel, it directly spread to the endless distance, directly acting on an unknown existence far away from this place. With the effect of the attractive force, there seemed to be an existence that was crossing space at an unimaginable speed and was about to descend on the planet. Luo Fan's towering willpower body stood in the void like a giant supporting the sky. His body naturally emitted a powerful aura that could support the heavens and the earth. Standing on the mountain peak, even if his height couldn't suppress the mountain peak, the aura he emitted made the mountain peak seem incomparably small, as if it had become a mound of dirt under his feet. He stood there and looked into the void. It was as if he could see through the barriers of the endless space and see a place that was infinitely far away. It's been 100,000 years. I didn't expect that force to still not disappear after 100,000 years. It's a pity that I'm only a spiritual doppelganger and I only cultivate the mysteries brought about by that force. I'm not the incarnation that cultivates the innate golden core, so I can't sense who is attacking me through the karma connection. Luo Fan sighed to himself. What he summoned with the help of the mysterious whirlpool was his clone that cultivated the innate golden core. Of course, it could not be anything else. In the past 100,000 years, his clone could not move at all. It was constantly being eroded by that force. Although it continuously wore down that force and purified its will to an unimaginable level, to the point where it could not be damaged no matter how much it eroded and destroyed, it still could not completely break through that force. It could not get rid of it. It could only drift towards the depths of the void like a meteorite under the effect of that force. At this moment, it had already left the river system and gone to the depths of the void tens of thousands of light years away. Even though Luo Fan used the mysterious force produced by the whirlpool to pull the meteorite back at an unimaginable speed, it was still impossible for it to cross the distance that it had traversed in the past 100,000 years in a short period of time. Therefore, Luo Fan was not in a hurry. After he sighed, he took a step forward. The will incarnation had already traversed more than half of the planet and arrived at the depths of the planet's ocean, where the first creature was born. Although the planet now had an ocean, however, the seawater in the ocean was not as clear as the seawater that Luo Fan had seen in the child-mother galaxy on Earth. The seawater on the planet was muddy. If the entire ocean was not so vast, one would even suspect that it was a sewage pool filled with mud and dirty water. The ocean contained almost all the substances that could be found on the planet. However, these substances were completely dissolved in the seawater, and they were distributed in various locations and depths of the ocean according to some rules. It was also because of this distribution that the various substances on the planet were able to mix to the greatest extent, displaying the most possible combinations. In the end, under the lightning that contained boundless vitality and the various other forces that promoted the evolution of life, life was born, giving birth to the first life on this planet since it was born. When Luo Fan arrived, his body turned into nothingness with a thought. It was as if his entire body had entered another space, leaving only a trace of his figure in the seawater. The reason he could appear in the depths of the ocean so mysteriously was because he did not want to disturb the fragile environment where life could be born. The reason he could do this so easily was because the planet was equivalent to his body. Everything inside and outside the planet was under his absolute control. If that was not the case, although he could also do this with other methods, he would need to use some power or even some divine abilities. It would definitely be difficult for him to do it so easily. Luo Fan stood there. With a thought, he locked onto the newly born single-celled life in front of him. This life could not even be considered a life at the moment. It did not have any consciousness or consciousness. Even its body was so small that people would easily ignore it. Only the indescribable life force fluctuations coming from it could confirm that it was a living being. Looking at this life that could not be called a life, Luo Fan could not help but sigh inwardly. This life, which would give birth to countless kinds of life in the future, might even give birth to powerful cultivators who could casually destroy stars and the void. At this moment it was so weak, so simple, and so crude. He only needed to raise his hand and slap it. Without using any power or relying on the absolute control that came with the body of the planet, he could wipe out this life and directly cut off the possibility of this life giving birth to countless kinds of life in the future. He would completely change the kind of life born on this planet in the future, directly turning the development of life on this planet in a different direction. With this thought, he suddenly felt that the weak, simple, and crude life in front of him was like the one that gave birth to 2, 3, and all things at the beginning of the world. The weak wave of life also seemed to reveal the profundities of the beginning, as if it contained the most fundamental profundities of all life. With a thought, Luo Fan decided to stop here and quietly watch how this life evolved and reproduced. After making up his mind, he directly sat down with his legs crossed and closed his eyes. He circulated his will, preparing to refine the incarnation of the will that had gathered from the entire planet. In terms of power alone, the incarnation of the will was so powerful that it could not be described with words. This could be seen from how Luo Fan found it slightly strenuous to compress it to a height of 100,000 meters. However, as mentioned before, because this will was gathered from all over the planet, it had not been refined before, so it was very scattered. If that was not the case, the body formed from such a huge amount of will would not be somewhat illusory, and it would not have truly become corporeal. Although Luo Fan intended to stay here and watch the evolution and reproduction of this creature, it could be imagined that this process would be extremely long and boring. Naturally, he would not waste his precious time. He just stared at this creature with his eyes wide open, waiting for it to change. Moreover, with his cultivation and realm, the amount of mental energy he needed to manage the evolution and reproduction process of the creature was extremely little. As such, he planned to refine the will that had gathered from all over the planet while he observed, so that the power of the will could be greatly increased. To Luo Fan, he had as many methods to refine his will as he wanted. As such, he did not need to think too much. After refining his will, there was a sudden bang where the heart of the incarnation was, and a chaotic green flame ignited. Once the green flame was ignited, it instantly expanded and enveloped his incarnation that was hundreds of thousands of meters tall. In this flame, Luo Fan's expression didn't change in the slightest, but his whole body gradually turned red, gradually melted, and gradually became illusory. It was as if he was constantly being burned and melted by this flame. At this moment, Luo Fan's will incarnation shook, and strands of strange patterns directly formed in his body. They began to guide these flames to circulate in his body according to some mysterious path. As the flames circulated, strands of black fog gradually drifted away from the flames like black smoke. As the black smoke drifted away, Luo Fan's body seemed to undergo some extremely weak but profound change. It seemed to become more crystalline and transparent. Time passed slowly. After Luo Fan entered the depths of the ocean and observed the evolution and reproduction of living beings while refining his will, the entire planet entered a gradual process of change. This process was not as earth-shattering as the previous 200 years, but it was not small either. Rain would fall from the sky almost every once in a while, and lightning would strike the surface of the entire planet, shattering mountains, opening up lakes, and opening up rivers. There were also all sorts of strange gales, and all sorts of strange gases were naturally born, constantly enriching the planet's atmosphere. Amidst these changes, the environment of the planet also gradually changed. Countless clouds formed, and all sorts of changes that carried away heat kept happening, causing the temperature of the planet to gradually drop. From a place that was originally only suitable for a few living beings that could adapt to high temperatures, it gradually became suitable for ordinary living beings. The area of the ocean kept increasing, and the environment of the land was also gradually changing. All sorts of substances that were not suitable for living beings gradually sank into the depths of the earth. The entire planet was transforming into a living planet at an unimaginable speed. At the bottom of the ocean where Luo Fan's will incarnation was, the first living beings that were born in the beginning were reproducing at an unimaginable speed. It was as if they would die in a few seconds. Just like that, it only took a few decades for the entire ocean to be filled with these extremely weak, extremely simple, and extremely crude living beings. In terms of numbers, there were probably trillions of them. These living beings were so weak, simple, and crude that they were naturally extremely sensitive to changes in the environment. When the location and the environment changed, these living beings would naturally undergo some kind of change. These changes were extremely diverse. Some could make the survival ability of living beings stronger, some could make the survival ability of living beings weaker, some could make living beings more complicated, and some could make living beings simpler. There were many such changes. However, no matter what the changes were, more and more living beings that were completely different from the original primeval life forms were naturally born. Among these numerous living beings, the living beings that were suitable for living would naturally be preserved, while the unsuitable ones would naturally be eliminated. As a result, the living beings in the ocean became more and more complex, more and more delicate, and more suitable for the changes in the environment. One day, after Luo Fan had started to refine his will, his body suddenly trembled. The chaotic flame that had been burning inside and outside his body for the past 100 years suddenly trembled and instantly expanded by 10,000 times. It directly covered Luo Fan's body completely, and the people outside could not even see the outline of Luo Fan's body within it. At the same time, the black fog that floated out of the flame also increased by countless times. It was like billowing smoke that shot into the sky, constantly twisting and entangling in the void, forming countless strange shapes. Earth, water, fire, wind, metal, wood, earth, thunder, mountains, swamps. Almost everything that existed inside and outside the planet seemed to be able to be found in the twisting and changing black fog. The black fog changed into various shapes, gradually increasing in size and gradually thinning out. In the end, it completely dissipated and integrated into the planet's atmospheric cycle and vitality cycle, causing the planet's atmosphere and vitality to undergo some kind of inexplicable change. It was as if some kind of imprint was gradually being branded. This process lasted for a total of 10 days and 10 nights. After 10 days and 10 nights, the void shook, and a soundless thunderous roar instantly erupted from the center of the flame. It shook the void, the vitality of the entire planet, and the atmosphere of the entire planet, causing countless hurricanes to suddenly appear on the entire planet. Countless vitality fluctuations formed a vitality torrent. However, all these changes around Luo Fan and the seawater around the flame were not affected at all. It was as if these changes had all occurred in another world, another plane, and another space. After the thunderous roar, the flame immediately disappeared. A translucent figure that was 30 meters tall and made up of tiny and dense particles that were the size of a speck of dust appeared. This figure was so profound. Even though it was constructed from the accumulation of countless particles, it emanated a profound aura that was extremely refined, pure, and seamless. As he sat there, he seemed to be the master of the entire world, the entire universe, and the entire void. It was as long as his gaze and thoughts could reach, everything would be completely under his control. It was as if the world, the universe, and the void had to submit to this figure, and could not resist him at all. This figure was naturally the incarnation of Luo Fan's will. After 100 years of refinement, Luo Fan had already refined the will that was gathered from the entire planet to the peak of his purity. All the impurities that he could sense within it had been completely removed by him. The originally scattered will had been completely condensed into an extremely condensed entity that could not be separated by any power. At this moment, there were definitely still impurities within the will incarnation, and there were definitely places that were scattered. However, that was only for existences with higher cultivation realms. To the current Luo Fan, the will incarnation was a supreme existence that could not be any more perfect. This was because he had already refined it to the limits of what he could do and what he could sense. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes. There seemed to be countless rays of light flashing in his eyes, as if there was endless intelligence flowing within them. His eyes swept across the surroundings, and the surrounding seawater instantly became gentle and calm. It was as if some existence had completely replaced the natural laws that originally controlled them. He raised his eyes and looked down. The mud below suddenly began to fluctuate according to his gaze, creating circles and circles of ripples. It was as if the mud was breathing along with his breathing. With a slight thought, without any movement or technique, the mud below naturally condensed into all kinds of strange beasts. They were vivid and lifelike, and even revealed traces of vitality. Bits and pieces of spiritual consciousness seemed to have truly turned into living creatures condensed from the mud. With a thought, the surrounding seawater suddenly shook, and similarly condensed into countless strange beasts. There were even various interactions with the strange beasts formed from the mud, as if they were naturally born living beings. So when one's will is strong to a certain extent, there can actually be such mysteries. Luo Fan experimented and could not help but sigh. At this moment, all the changes in the sludge and seawater did not rely on any of his power, nor did they make use of the convenience of the planet as his main body. In other words, even if they appeared on another planet, another part of the starry sky, another part of the sea, or another piece of sludge, their performance would not be any different from before. Because all these changes came from his will, it was his will. The instant he looked at the mud and seawater, he directly made the seawater naturally submit to his will. It naturally changed itself to cater to his will, and even did not hesitate to form spiritual consciousness. Of course, if one said that it submitted, it was only on the surface. If one analyzed it carefully, it was because his will had already reached an unimaginable level, so strong that it surpassed a certain boundary. This caused the mud and seawater that he looked at to naturally be infected by his will, and could naturally change according to his will. It naturally changed its form, and even formed the previous manifestation of spiritual consciousness. The so-called submission in the human world was essentially no different from this, so it was called submission. This substance changed according to his will, and it was even faster, smoother, and more agile than the body changing according to his will. The mysteries were simply indescribable with words. Chapter 665 Essence Chapter 665 Chapter 626 Get out of trouble. After experimenting for a while, Luo Fan's thoughts flickered, dispersing his control over the seawater and the silt. Search for the latest updates here. He lifted his eyes and glanced around. Everything in the entire sea was taken into his senses. The process of the primeval creature's reproduction flashed quickly in his mind. The process of the primeval creature's reproduction was, of course, monotonous and boring to the point that it could make people collapse. However, if one put everything together, he could vaguely see a vague principle controlling everything. It guided the primeval creature's evolution and reproduction, making the lives in the sea evolve in a certain direction. This law was so obscure and mysterious that even though Luo Fan could faintly perceive it, he was completely unable to see it clearly, let alone comprehend it. He could only faintly feel that there was some kind of indescribable mystery within it. If he could comprehend it, he feared that he would obtain unimaginable achievements. However, it was extremely difficult to comprehend this law, and it had reached an unimaginable level. According to Luo Fan's deduction, he was afraid that he would have to wait until the life on this planet had developed to the extreme, then decline and finally die. Only then would he be able to comprehend this law a little bit, and if he wanted to comprehend it, he would have to repeat this process countless of millions of times. Moreover, the process of every single life from birth to death required at least a few billion years. At this point, it could be confirmed that with Luo Fan's current cultivation, it was already impossible for him to truly comprehend this law and obtain accomplishments that exceeded his imagination. Understanding this, Luo Fan sighed. With a move of his body, he lifted his foot and took a step forward. He had already left the ocean and appeared on the mountain that he had appeared on in the beginning. This place was not much different from 100 years ago. The mountain was still barren, but there were more rocks and more kinds of materials in the rock. Above the mountain peak, the faintly discernible vortex was still rotating at a steady pace. The mysterious suction force was still being exerted, constantly pulling the meteorite that was tens of thousands of light years away. Looking at the whirlpool, Luo Fan's eyes flashed with wisdom. 100 years ago, this whirlpool was the strongest whirlpool he could build. It was the limit of what he could do. However, after 100 years of constant tempering of his will had surpassed a certain limit and finally possessed unimaginable power. He had discovered many of the vortex's weaknesses and found many areas that could be improved upon in the way the vortex was constructed. As long as he had it, it would be an extremely simple matter for a cultivator like Luo Fan to improve his cultivation. Luo Fan's will move. In a flash, he had the whirlpool under his absolute control. As the whirlpool came under his control, a feeling that the whirlpool had become more compatible with his will than his own body surged into his mind. With just a thought, the whirlpool reacted at an unimaginable speed, producing some sort of transformation that matched his thoughts. Feeling the feedback that was more flexible and faster than his body, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile. With a thought, the whirlpool began to change in a strange way. This change did not just speed up the whirlpool's rotation. Instead, it gradually slowed down. When it finally stabilized, the whirlpool's speed was less than 1/100th of its previous speed. However, the rhythm, frequency, and trajectory of the vortex's rotation had undergone an earth-shattering change. It seemed to have gained a mysterious and indescribable aura, and it seemed to be even more compatible with the laws of the world. With this change, the extremely mysterious suction force produced by the whirlpool, which did not affect anything in the surroundings but had an effect on the meteorite that was countless light years away, increased by more than 10,000 times. The appearance of this suction force caused the distant meteorite to shake violently. It instantly turned into a stream of light and shot straight toward this galaxy. Originally, the speed of the meteor was already unimaginably fast. Now that its speed skyrocketed, it directly broke through the speed limit of the Earth's universe. It broke through the void, causing the meteor to flicker as it flew, as if it was teleporting. This change caused the speed at which the meteor flew towards the star system was more than 10,000 times faster than it had been before. In just a few days, it had traveled through an unknown number of light years and directly arrived in the galaxy where Luo Fan's spiritual sense clone was located. The meteorite was so fast that the impact it produced was unimaginable. The moment it rushed into the galaxy, every planet, every satellite, and even the huge star in the center of the galaxy trembled violently. The tremors were so strong that the topography of almost every star underwent earth-shattering changes. Countless meteorites in the asteroid belts around the stars shattered, causing the number of meteorites to soar. Boom! With an earth-shattering roar, the meteorite directly broke through the atmosphere of the planet where Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had merged with. passed through the thick atmosphere and directly rushed into the vortex at the top of the mountain. The meteorite was pulled in by the extremely strong suction force of the vortex. Even though there were many gravitational sources in the galaxy, which could produce hundreds of powerful suction forces, they could not change its trajectory. Even the planet where the spiritual sense clone was located could not make the meteorite fall to the ground after it entered the atmosphere. Under the effect of the suction force, the meteorite broke through the void and rushed into the vortex without directly colliding with the planet. The impact on the planet was only stirring up its atmosphere. It was only the strong fluctuations produced by the shock wave that caused some kind of vibration on the planet. Even though the vibration was so shocking that it directly turned the mountain into powder, and even caused a huge pit of tens of thousands of miles under the mountain, and even caused magma to gush out from the bottom of the pit, the damage was negligible compared to directly colliding with the planet. It's a pity that I overestimated the impact of the shock wave. Standing under the vortex, Luo Fan smiled and sighed. With a slight thought, the ground under his control began to squirm like a living thing. It seemed to have turned into a magnificent army, rushing towards the center from all directions. In the blink of an eye, the pit was completely filled up, forming a plane with a radius of tens of thousands of miles. After the plane was formed, Luo Fan cast his gaze towards the vortex. This vortex was extremely profound, and it moved according to one's will. After Luo Fan changed it earlier, an extremely vast space had been opened up within the vortex. This void was not stable, and it was only comparable to the void of Earth's universe. However, it was boundless and could contain everything in the world. Even if the entire galaxy was to be stored in it, it would not take up even a millionth of this void. Of course, if he wanted to store the entire galaxy, Luo Fan had to be able to lift it up. The vortex could not move. If he could not lift up the entire galaxy, how could he store it? Therefore, although the void was boundless, its practicality was quite limited. At least for Luo Fan's current cultivation realm, it was not very practical. At this moment, the meteorite that contained his innate gold core cultivation technique was constantly moving in circles in the boundless void. Under Luo Fan's control, there was a strong resistance acting on the meteorite in the void, causing the speed of the meteorite to continuously slow down as it continued to move. The meteorite had been flying in the void for more than 100,000 years, attracting the stardust in the void to join it at every moment. More than 100,000 years was enough for the meteorite to grow to the size of the moon. For such a huge meteorite to fly at a speed that could even break through the void, one could imagine the strength of its impact. It was obvious how difficult it was to slow it down until it came to a stop, and it was obvious how difficult it was without much thought. Fortunately, after it entered the whirlpool, the suction force that the whirlpool emitted, which could cause this meteorite to fly back from an unknown number of light-years away, had already disappeared without a trace. Although this meteorite was fast, it was only due to inertia. Under that resistance, its speed continued to decrease. After 10 days and 10 nights, its speed finally decreased to a speed that surpassed the speed of sound by 100 times. To Luo Fan, such a speed was no different from stopping. Therefore, with a single thought from Luo Fan, the entire planet trembled slightly. An indescribable suction force suddenly gathered in one spot and charged into the vortex. It passed through the endless void and directly acted on the meteorite. The meteorite was already suffering from all kinds of resistance force, and its speed was constantly decreasing. Suddenly, it was affected by the indescribable suction force. It suddenly paused, shook, and began to spin wildly in the void. Standing outside the vortex, Luo Fan's eyes flickered with infinite wisdom. He raised his hand and grabbed at the void. The invisible suction force was like a sword in his hand, and it began to change as he moved. It began to move and began to act on the meteorite in a very special and mysterious way. After 100,000 years, The stardust that formed the meteorite had already condensed to an unimaginable degree. It had even fused with the force that had bombarded Luofan. Its sturdiness was something that even a diamond couldn't compare to. It was precisely such a sturdy meteorite that it was able to maintain its integrity amidst its swift speed, and it was even to the extent that it wasn't damaged in the slightest when it emanated a shockwave that could annihilate a mountain. However, such a meteorite seemed like tofu that was cut by a scalpel before the force formed from the gravitational force of the entire planet. The meteorites on it shot out in all directions, and they ceaselessly shrunk at a visible speed before ceaselessly falling apart. The gravitational force of a star was so strong that it could even make a peerlessly enormous satellite revolve around it. At this moment, it had been condensed to the size of the tip of a needle, and its destructive force was obvious. It was even possible for it to pierce through space and annihilate golden immortals. If it wasn't for Luofan tempering his will to such an extent that it exceeded his limits, it would be utterly impossible for him to compress the gravitational force to such an extent, and it was even to the extent that compressing the gravitational force to an area of 300 m was almost impossible. The stardust had already fused with the energy that raged within Luofan's body. During the process of using the gravitational force to sculpt the meteorite, it was naturally sculpting that energy as well, causing strands of energy to leave the meteorite at every single moment and gradually disperse into space. It ceaselessly warped and raged, and it was even to the extent that it gathered the stardust to form various extremely strange forms. It seemed like rocks, living beings, beasts. However, even though this energy was tough and of high quality, it was extremely small in quantity after all, and it was unable to resist the energy that naturally existed in space. Even though it was able to rage for a long time, it was still slowly eliminated in the end and completely vanished, causing the stardust to finally lose its vitality and disperse once more. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, another few months had passed. After a few months, the meteorite that was originally the size of a moon had already been sculpted into a 30-meter-tall human figure by the gravitational needle. This human figure lay horizontally in space. Its appearance was similar to that of Luofan, and even the pores on its face were incomparably clear. Even though the energy had fused with the surrounding stardust to form the meteorite, its original goal was to erase Luofan, so most of its energy was naturally concentrated on Luofan's body. At most, it had expanded to a radius of a few meters around Luofan. As a result, the energy within a radius of a few meters around Luofan's body was many times stronger than the energy in the outside world. The difficulty of getting rid of it was naturally much more difficult than the other stardust. It was precisely because of this that Luofan had unknowingly formed the human-shaped sculpture lying horizontally in the direction of the barrier that had suddenly increased in difficulty as he continued to sculpt the meteorite. After sculpting to such an extent, the combination of the inside and the outside should be able to get rid of this energy. Such a thought flashed through Luofan's mind. His main body in the meteorite had not lost his perception of the outside world. He was very clear about all the experiences of this spiritual avatar that had fused with the planet over the years. It could even be said that all of this was under his control and arrangement. However, because he was entangled by that energy and suppressed by the endless stardust around him, he could not move or use his energy, so he could not get rid of it. In this rare opportunity, Luofan did not need to communicate with the outside world. They each operated their respective means in an incomparably perfect way. The spiritual avatar in the outside world concentrated all the gravitational force of the entire planet, and even all the gravitational force of the central star on the planet, into one spot. Like an awl, it directly pierced into the top of the sculpture's head. Although this gravitational force had condensed into an awl, it seemed to be scattered and not condensed enough compared to the previously condensed needles. It seemed that its power had been greatly reduced, and it could not break through the more powerful stardust. But that was just the appearance. Don't forget that this gravitational all was condensed with the gravitational force of the Sun acting on the planet. The Sun was millions of times larger than the planet. Even if the gravitational force it produced was only directed at the planet, it was definitely countless times stronger than the gravitational force produced by the planet itself. With such a strong gravitational force concentrated in one spot, although the volume formed was much larger than the previous needles, its power was thousands of times stronger than the previous needles. Suddenly, the attack came crashing down, and the human-shaped statue that was lying on the ground shook violently. In an instant, countless cracks appeared and densely wrapped around the statue. At the same time, waves of unparalleled power erupted from inside the sculpture. It was as if hundreds of millions of nuclear bombs had suddenly exploded inside it, producing an indescribably powerful explosive force. It directly blasted the sculpture that had countless cracks, causing the sculpture to instantly shatter into countless fragments. It even tore open the void and directly broke open the vortex, causing the void inside the vortex to collapse and scatter in all directions. Luo Fan had originally condensed and guided the planet into the vortex due to the gravitational force exerted on it by the central star. After losing the gravitational force, the planet was about to fly straight in the direction of its original revolution and leave its original trajectory. The explosion caused by the explosion of the vortex happened at this moment, but it produced an earth-shattering impact that directly collided with the planet. At the same time, a huge crater of hundreds of meters deep was formed on the newly formed plane below. At the same time, the inertia of flying straight away was instantly offset, allowing the planet to maintain its original orbit. When the explosive force disappeared, Luo Fan had already dispersed the gravitational all and reloaded the gravitational force of the Sun onto the planet, allowing the planet to be subjected to the gravitational force of the central star again and eliminating the hidden danger of it deviating from its orbit. In the midst of the explosion, a figure wrapped in a sparkling brilliance, as if made of some strange crystal, rushed out of the vortex. In an instant, the entire planet, as well as the void within tens of millions of miles around the planet, were radiated by this will. Within the range of this will, everything seemed to submit to this will. It seemed that as long as this will moved, the void could be shattered, and the laws of nature could be changed. Everything within the range of this will seemed to be subservient to this will. It was as if everything could be reversed, space could be shattered, and the laws of nature could be changed with a single thought from this will. This will was tens of thousands of times stronger than the will refined by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger. It even made the will tempered by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger seem as weak as an ant. When this figure appeared, there were all kinds of indescribable vibrations in the void. There seemed to be some kind of mysterious power beginning to condense in the void above his head. An indescribably terrifying aura gradually emitted from it, as if some kind of astonishing existence was forming there. It seemed that when that existence was truly formed, it would cause shocking destruction. Chapter 666. Escape. Chapter 666. Escape. Chapter 627. Novel type. Chapter 667. Gathering of 3 as 5 cheese collecting in one's head. This figure was naturally Luo Fan, who had been enveloped by the power for 100,000 years. At this time, Luo Fan was suspended in the void. His entire body was sparkling and translucent. It was as if his entire body was made of crystals that were millions of times harder than diamonds. Each crystal was exuding an aura that seemed indestructible and indestructible. Each of these crystals was a strand of will crystal that had broken through the limit, turning illusory into real, and was born from the original illusory nothingness. They were the results of Luo Fan's will in the past 100,000 years by using that power to purify his own will. That power had entangled Luo Fan for more than 100,000 years, but it was still worn down by less than 1%. How could its destructive power to the will and the ability to purify it be comparable to that of the spiritual sense doppelganger, which had been refined by the mysterious flame for a short 100 years? Because of this, the will of the original body could reach such a level, which was tens of thousands of times stronger than the pure will of the spiritual sense doppelganger. As mentioned before, the will that was refined by Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had reached the limit of what he could perceive. In other words, the level of the pure will of the spiritual sense doppelganger had reached the peak of Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. If it was 10,000 times purer than this peak, it was equivalent to breaking through Luo Fan's cultivation realm by more than 10,000 times. On the other hand, Luo Fan's own cultivation had already reached the peak of the primordial gold rank, and he was only a step away from attaining the golden immortal Tao fruit. To this incarnation of his in the Earth universe, he was only a step away from attaining the cultivation of a golden immortal. Increasing it by 10,000 times from this foundation had faintly broken a certain limit. It allowed Luo Fan to break through the barrier of that power. When he reappeared in the Earth's universe, it caused a reaction from the great Tao in the Earth's universe. At this moment, the power condensing in the void above his head was similar to the heavenly tribulation. This was a power unique to the Earth and the universe itself, a power that could destroy everything. The reason why this power appeared was not because a cultivator had the willpower of Luo Fan, but because Luo Fan had a willpower that far surpassed his own cultivation level. If Luo Fan possessed a cultivation realm that was compatible with this will, then he would naturally be able to attain the cultivation realm of the innate golden immortal realm, and he would naturally be able to perfectly fuse with the Grand Tao. Thus, it would naturally be impossible for such a force to arise and annihilate him. But Luo Fan did not have that level of attainment. The appearance of this will caused an indescribable impact on the great Tao of the entire Earth and universe. This impact was formed by the will's instinctive desire to obtain the corresponding cultivation realm. It was the will's instinctive desire to obtain the endless mysteries of the great Tao from the great Tao in order to increase its cultivation realm. How could such actions not cause backlash from the Grand Tao? How could it not cause the supreme power of the Earth and universe to gather to wipe him out? This was the most powerful danger he had encountered since he came to the Earth. But at the same time, it was also an opportunity. A supreme opportunity that could allow him to directly comprehend the mysteries of the Grand Luo and directly obtain a qualitative improvement in his cultivation realm. As long as Luo Fan could survive the annihilation of this power, he would be able to directly obtain the mysteries of the Grand Luo from the Great Tao, allowing him to directly become a connate golden immortal realm cultivator, and even allow his main body in the primordial world to directly attain the Tao fruit of the Grand Luo. At this moment, Luo Fan's willpower had reached a point where even that power could not shake it. There was naturally no need to mention how brilliant his wisdom was. In just a blink of an eye, he had already understood all of the above. He could not help but reveal a faint smile on his face. He was not afraid of danger at all. After all, at this moment, it was only a clone of his in the Earth. So what if it was killed? At most, he would send another clone into the Earth. Although that would consume an extremely large amount of magic power, it was not a loss that could not be made up for. Since he was not afraid of this danger, then what was meaningful to him was naturally the opportunity that came with the danger. Under such circumstances, how could Luo Fan not feel happy? As for Earth's cosmos, it might be even more profound and complicated than he had imagined. His clone in Earth's cosmos might have even more uses, but in front of the mysteries of Zenith Heaven, all of that was secondary. As long as he could comprehend the mysteries of Zenith Heaven, he wouldn't feel the slightest bit of reluctance to give up everything. With a slight smile, he raised his head and looked at the power that was continuously condensing, vibrating, and emitting all sorts of terrifying auras in the void above his head. After weighing it in his heart, he knew that this power was simply too powerful. Even the Earth's universe could not easily condense it. Therefore, it would take at least 3 years before it could finally condense into form and kill him. Moreover, during these 3 years of time, because the Grand Tao was a backlash that targeted him alone, he was unable to directly obtain the profundities of the golden immortal realm, and he was unable to rely on these 3 years of time to forcefully break through and attain the golden immortal realm. After weighing it clearly, he was not disappointed. With a thought, the radiating will domain quickly shrank back into his body. In the blink of an eye, it shrunk back into his body. The crystal-clear will that enveloped his body and revealed an unbreakable and unbreakable will also faded away. Although it did not disappear, it could no longer be seen. After all, it was Luo Fan's will. No matter how strong it was still under his complete control. If he wanted to fade away, he could naturally do so. After the will faded away, Luo Fan's figure returned to his normal appearance. He wore a long robe and had a calm expression on his face. He floated in the void like an ordinary person, and there were no signs of anything unusual. Even so, the power that was constantly shaking the void above his head and condensing did not disappear. Instead, it was still persisting. It was as if all forces, rules, and laws could not delay it at all. Since the main body of the Earth universe had appeared, there was naturally no need for the will that was condensed from the spiritual sense clone to stay. Therefore, it directly twisted and formed a mysterious vortex. It directly gathered the scattered power that was continuously condensing at an extremely fast speed in the void. However, because it was too scattered from the previous bombardment, it still did not condense into a form. Then, it wrapped around the power and sank towards the planet's core below. After experiencing a series of attacks, the power had already lost more than 90% of its power. However, its essence still did not decrease. It was still a power that far exceeded Luo Fan's current cultivation realm. It was even higher than the power that a connate zenith heaven cultivator possessed. This power could refine the will of Luo Fan's main body in the Earth universe, which was also the will of Luo Fan's connate golden core Dharma clone, to such a degree. Obviously, it had an unimaginable destructive power to will. The will of this spiritual consciousness avatar had already reached the peak of his cultivation realm. Other than directly increasing his cultivation realm, he could only continue to purify and improve with the help of the power's refinement. Hovering in the void, Luo Fan watched the power gradually condense and gradually emit an aura that he was extremely familiar with. His expression was neither happy nor angry, but a certain deep light flashed through his eyes. This person must be above the connate zenith heaven. Although I used my main body's cultivation realm to cause the backlash of the great Tao and produce countless thunderbolts to repel him, he definitely did not suffer any harm. The essence of this power is stronger than the power that gave birth to the spiritual sense clone. However, it did not naturally condense a spiritual sense. This also proves that the existence is still not dead, but it is not easy to use karma to sense it. Never mind, I'll look for that existence to end karma after I get through this tribulation. Such a thought flashed through his mind. For the past 100,000 years, he had been constantly being corroded and destroyed by that power. Even his will had been purified to a level that far exceeded the limits of his cultivation by tens of thousands of times. One could imagine how terrifying the pain he felt was. Therefore, even though he had obtained great benefits from that power, he did not have any thoughts of giving up on investigating what happened in the past. As for why he was sure that the existence was still alive, other than the fact that his counterattack could not really harm the existence that had reached the connate zenith heaven level, the most important judgment was that the power that had been entangled with him for more than 100,000 years did not have a spiritual sense. It was mentioned a long time ago that when one's power reached a certain level in the Earth's universe, such as the connate zenith heaven level, it would naturally be enhanced by the Grand Tao, and a spiritual sense would be born from that, causing the power to transform into another form of living being. This living being even possessed a cultivation realm that was extremely close to the connate zenith heaven level, and it could utilize that power to the acme of perfection. It was sufficient to suppress all cultivators below the connate zenith heaven level. Luo Fan's spiritual sense clone had obtained a power that was similar to the connate zenith heaven level, and it was precisely because of this that it could fuse with this planet and make this planet into its body. However, for the past 100,000 years, the power that was entangled with Luo Fan did not have any spiritual sense at all. It merely maintained the inertia from when the power was emitted, and it constantly destroyed Luo Fan's body and disintegrated his will with the intention of wiping him out from this universe. Of course, this was not a contradiction. The fundamental reason for this was that this power had an owner, and the owner of this power clearly did not directly sever the connection between this power and himself. As a result, this power could not be independent. In other words, this power was equivalent to having a spiritual sense, so it naturally did not need the enhancement of the Grand Tao to make it develop a spiritual sense. That was why for the past 100,000 years, this power of such outstanding quality actually could not even produce the most basic spiritual sense. From this, it could also be deduced that the owner of this power, the existence that emitted this power, was still somewhere in this universe, and was still living quite well. If that was not the case, this power would naturally be enhanced by the Grand Tao and become a spiritual sense after losing its owner. After this thought flashed through his mind, Luo Fan directly sat down with his legs crossed. His will, which was already so powerful that it surpassed the limits of his cultivation realm by countless times, surged slightly. 3 feet above his head, an auspicious cloud dragging 3 turbid green lotuses appeared out of thin air. After the auspicious cloud and the AAA appeared, Luo Fan's eyes lit up with countless rays of wisdom. His mind and will kept tracing back. The scene that he had seen when he had condensed the Tao integration AAA was condensed again by his willpower, which surpassed his limits by tens of thousands of times. It reappeared in his mind and will, making him feel as if he had returned to that moment and was going through the breakthrough again. His mind and will sank into that scene. In a trance, he seemed to see countless mysteries that he had dreamed of. It was as if all the mysteries of the Grand Tao that he needed were within his reach and could be directly obtained by him. If his will was still at the level of 100,000 years, even if he could condense this scene again, he would definitely still be lost in it. In the end, he would only be able to escape when the opportunity for a breakthrough passed. However, because this scene was condensed with the help of his will and was not real, it could not allow him to achieve any breakthrough. It was only equivalent to reliving the feeling of the moment when he broke through, but this was naturally not the case at this moment. At this moment, his will was already tens of thousands of times stronger than before. Even if he spent a large amount of will to condense these scenes again, the remaining will could still allow him to maintain a clear state of mind and wander around in this strange and mysterious state, comprehending the various mysteries within. And when he wandered around in it with a clear state of mind and comprehended the various mysteries within, he finally found out where exactly this place was. Back then, he had not been wrong to think that this was the Great Chaos. This place was indeed the Great Chaos. However, it was not a complete Great Chaos. It was just a side of the Great Chaos that was activated by the innate gold core cultivation method that he cultivated and was compatible with his cultivation method. The various mysteries of the Grand Tao that were displayed were only a part of the mysteries of the Grand Tao that were compatible with his cultivation method. There was still a huge difference between the mysteries of the Grand Tao and the true Great Chaos. If he wanted to comprehend the true Great Chaos through this place and truly be able to move freely in the Great Chaos, it was still just a fantasy and absolutely impossible. Understanding this, although Luo Fan had expected this, he was still a little disappointed. Fortunately, his will was already earth-shattering. This disappointment only flashed in his mind for a moment, and it almost disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Next, he carefully observed and comprehended the various mysteries of the Grand Tao, the various mysteries of the Grand Tao, and the various truths of the universe contained in it. He constantly corroborated them with the various things that he had comprehended, causing his cultivation realm to constantly improve. After an unknown period of time, it seemed like only a moment had passed, but it also seemed like billions of years had passed. Luo Fan suddenly came to a sudden realization, and he finally comprehended a certain critical juncture. His mind suddenly surged with indescribable joy, and a feeling of great freedom arose from his heart. So that's how it is. So it's so simple. Luo Fan slowly opened his eyes and murmured. As he spoke, in the depths of his body, in a mysterious space that was deeper than the void and vaster than the universe, 5 streams of qi suddenly broke through countless barriers and rushed out of the extremely deep mysterious space. They directly rushed out of the top of his head, and instantly rushed into the auspicious cloud that was a meter above his head. When the 5 streams of qi collided with the auspicious cloud, they instantly collapsed and turned into powder and dust that was thousands of times finer than any number in the world could describe. Before they scattered in all directions, they directly shrank and rushed into the 5 streams of qi. They were directly swallowed by the 5 streams of qi. After the 5 streams of qi engulfed the auspicious cloud, they suddenly expanded from the originally finger-sized streams of qi to a radius of several dozen feet. Like 5 pillars of qi, they shot into the sky and passed through Tao Integration Stage 3A. They collided hundreds of miles above Tao Integration Stage 3A and gradually merged to form a vortex that continuously sucked in the 5 pillars of qi. The 5 pillars of qi continuously merged into the vortex, causing the vortex to become larger and larger, more and more condensed, and more mysterious. The vortex's sucking of the pillars of qi was shockingly powerful. It was as if even 5 oceans could be sucked dry in an instant. However, the 5 pillars of qi were equally mysterious. Although they were being sucked by the vortex, they continuously rushed out of the mysterious space in the depths of Luo Fan's body and merged into the vortex. It was as if there were billions of oceans in it, and no matter how much they were sucked, they did not decrease in the slightest. Just like that, the sucking process continued, and the vortex continued to grow. Not long after, it had grown to an area of 10 acres. After a few days, it had grown to a radius of 10,000 miles. It covered the sky and covered the earth, as if the entire void of the universe had been broken. At that moment, Luo Fan's expression was calm. All kinds of mysterious brilliance flashed through his eyes, as if his body and mind had entered some kind of indescribable profound realm. He seemed to be completely unaware of all the changes in the outside world. Although he could see them, none of them could pass through his mind. In the blink of an eye, 9 days and 9 nights passed. The vortex had already grown to a radius of 100,000 kilometers. It was so vast that it completely covered the land within 100,000 kilometers, causing the land within 100,000 kilometers to turn pitch black, as if it had entered a polar night. The density of the pillars of qi in the center of such a huge vortex had increased to an unimaginable degree. Finally, at a certain moment, it broke through its shackles and surpassed its limits. A fist-sized existence that could not be described with words suddenly appeared in the center of the vortex. After this existence was formed, the vortex that covered a radius of 100,000 miles suddenly trembled and was sucked dry in an instant. Even the 5 pillars of qi that seemed like they could last for billions of years were completely extracted from the depths of Luo Fan's body in an instant. They were directly thrown into the existence and disappeared without a trace. In the blink of an eye, only a meter-wide existence was left in the void, appearing 50 miles above Luo Fan's head. The existence rotated in the void and slowly descended. It seemed to be very slow, but in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived above Luo Fan's head. With a tremble, it turned into a mysterious 5-layered halo of light that wrapped around the AAA and landed behind Luo Fan's head. Chapter 628. Novel Type. Novel Type. Chapter 668. Refining Equipment. Refinement. The convergence of 3 essences and 5 Chi's unification was a realm above the natural leakless golden core. Although the two were separated into 2 steps, and it took Luo Fan hundreds of millions of years to complete these 2 steps, in fact, the combination of the 3 Chi gathering at the top and the 5 Chis gathering at the top could be considered a complete realm. The 5 streams of air that had charged out from the depths of Luo Fan's body earlier were the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi. The 5 strands of golden Luo Chi dispersed the auspicious clouds and transformed into 5 pillars of air that charged into the sky. They weaved together high up in the sky 50 kilometers above Luo Fan, and the vortex they formed was the predecessor of the Genesis. In the end, the fist-sized existence that was formed at the center of the vortex was the Genesis. The entire process of the 5 streams of air charging out from within his body until they formed the fist-sized existence was the process of the convergence of 5 Chis. The Genesis was an extremely profound and mysterious existence. Without truly forming the Genesis, even Luo Fan couldn't know exactly what it was or what profundities it possessed. However, to Luo Fan, who had already completed the process of forming the Genesis was no longer a secret to him, and he easily knew exactly what it was. The Genesis was the predecessor of the golden Luo Chi, the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi. The convergence of 5 Chis meant to weave together the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi and fuse the fragments of the profundities of the grand Luo Chi within them. In the end, it formed the predecessor of the grand Luo Chi, the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi. The reason why the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi could only weave together the embryonic form of the grand Luo Chi and the Genesis before the grand Luo Chi could not form the true grand Luo was because the profundities of the grand Luo Chi were boundless and boundless. Although the 5 strands of golden Luo Chi contained fragments of the profundities of the grand Luo Chi, they were only an extremely small portion. When they were fused together, they were still extremely far away from the true profundities of the grand Luo Chi. It was already extremely difficult for them to form the Genesis. In fact, only cultivators who cultivated the connate golden core dermic art could fuse the 5 streams of zenith heaven chi into essence the moment they appeared. If a cultivator didn't cultivate the connate golden core and only cultivated the postnatal golden core, such as Lier, even if he cultivated 5 strands of zenith heaven chi, he would need a long time to polish, refine, and cultivate. Only then would he be able to grow enough of the zenith heaven's mysteries to form this origin. In Luo Fan's opinion, once the origin had taken form, his future path of cultivation would be to constantly strengthen the origin and allow it to grow ceaselessly. In the end, it would undergo a complete qualitative change and become a golden immortal. When he completed this step, Luo Fan would break through and become a first heaven golden immortal. Understanding the path he had to take next, Luo Fan's face gradually revealed a smile. He floated in the air, the 5 halos behind his head moving in a mysterious and subtle way. As they moved, strands of the mysteries of the zenith heaven seeped out from them, and a form of perfection spread out and enveloped the space around him. Within the ring of light, the 3 green lotuses with a chaotic luster seemed to be floating, and the profoundness they exuded was even more obvious. However, they seemed to have fused with the ring of light, and the aura they exuded seemed to gradually fuse with the ring of light around them, as if they were weaving together into one. During the process of Luo Fan's 5 Chi's unification, the extremely terrifying energy that was condensing above his head didn't stop for a moment, but it didn't speed up as well. It was as if Luo Fan's 5 Chi's unification didn't make any difference to it at all. After calculating for a while, Luo Fan noticed that it had already been half a year since he started trying to achieve the 5 Chi's unification. At most, it would take another 2.5 years for the terrifying energy above his head to truly condense into form. After knowing the time, Luo Fan already knew what he had to do. After coming to Earth, Luo Fan hadn't encountered many battles, but most of them were against existences whose strength or cultivation far surpassed his own. This allowed him to comprehend many principles that he couldn't comprehend with his current level of cultivation, but it was also an extremely dangerous experience. And this dangerous experience also allowed Luo Fan to discover his greatest weakness, which was that he didn't have any magic tools at all. Whether it was against cultivators whose cultivation realm was far lower than his, or against supreme existences whose cultivation realm was tens of thousands of times higher than his, he could only face them empty-handed. He could only rely on his own divine ability to face them. Magic treasures were extremely important to cultivators, and for ordinary cultivators, they could be said to be the basis of their entire strength. It could be said that if an ordinary cultivator didn't have a magic treasure, they would find it difficult to use their own cultivation. Their strength would be at least 100, or even 1,000 times weaker than when they had magic treasures. Luo Fan wasn't an ordinary cultivator. He himself was already able to completely bring forth his own cultivation, and every single move he made carried supreme might and boundless divine abilities. He was practically omnipotent. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan neglected the use of magic treasures. After coming to Earth for such a long time, he actually didn't think of refining a magic treasure to use. This was also a habit brought about by the Untainted World. In Untainted World, although Luo Fan had several magic treasures, he was still used to using his own strength when fighting against enemies. With his cultivation level, he could almost use his own strength in Untainted World, which naturally encouraged him to think that he didn't need magic treasures. However, after coming to Earth and encountering these few battles, he finally understood that although Earth had already entered the age of Dharma ending, because of the endless time it had existed, it had a foundation that far surpassed Untainted World. In Untainted World, he could be said to be an innate god that could suppress heaven and earth, and even be respected as a Tao master by all living beings in the world. However, in Earth, he was nothing, not to mention the 7 great sages who would appear in the future 5-6 billion years in the future, the Supreme Buddha who was inextricably linked to the Earth's universe but was actually outside the Earth's universe, even Yen Kong and the Palm he encountered more than 100,000 years ago were not people he could compare with. Under such circumstances, with his own strength, it was slightly insufficient to even protect himself, let alone suppress everything like Untainted World. Because of this, to Luo Fan, if he really wanted to have a strong enough ability to survive in Earth, he needed magic treasures or even magic treasures to increase his strength. After completing the 5 Qis unification, the world in Luo Fan's eyes had new changes compared to the past. He could directly go deep into the source of everything he saw, directly see the mysterious rules hidden behind those things, and easily see the truth that needed to be carefully comprehended in the past. Therefore, after he used the unification of 5 Qis, he was able to see through his flaws with just a thought. He knew that it was time for him to refine a magic treasure. With a slight thought, Luo Fan took a step forward, and his figure instantly crossed the planet, directly arriving at the meteorite belt next to the star. The whole process of him stepping out of the planet and crossing the void was like moving clouds and flowing water, without the slightest fluctuation of space. It was like an ordinary person crossing the threshold of space to arrive outside of space. It was impossible to tell that during the process, he had crossed a distance that could be calculated with the speed of light. Compared to before he had the 5 Qis unification, it was much easier and more mysterious. After arriving at the meteorite belt, Luo Fan did not hesitate. With a slight thought, the will that was originally hidden in his body trembled and reappeared. Luo Fan, who was in the meteorite belt, instantly turned into a crystal-clear sculpture that seemed to be constructed from countless particles that were many times stronger than diamonds. In that instant, the void within a range of several 100 million kilometers around his body gave off a feeling that it was completely under his control. This area was so vast that it enveloped 1/3 of the meteorite belt. This caused the meteorites orbiting the central star in the meteorite belt to unknowingly change their trajectories. They gradually deviated from their original trajectories, as if they had been frozen by a force. The light of wisdom flickered wildly in Luo Fan's eyes. The appearance of the entire meteorite belt had completely changed in his eyes. The meteorites that had originally been there had completely disappeared, and in their place were lumps of light that were formed from strange rules. These rules were like countless threads. Not only did they condense into a ball, but they were also interconnected with each other. They were even vaguely connected to an overwhelming ball of light in the distance, as if they were resonating with each other. These clusters of light constructed from strands of laws were the origin of the envoys, and the massive cluster of light in the distance was naturally the central star of this galaxy. Carefully distinguishing the clumps of light formed by these strands of laws, Luo Fan occasionally had a thought. He raised his hand and grabbed one of the clumps of light, pulling it to his side. In just a few days, his surroundings were filled with 12,960 lumps of light. These lumps of light were only what Luo Fan could see. In fact, these lumps of light were actually the same as the appearance of 12,960 lumps of light around the meteorite. This meant that there were 12,960 meteorites around him. These meteorites were of different sizes. The big ones were even as big as the moon, while the small ones were at most a few dozen feet in radius. They were of completely different sizes, but when they were arranged, there was no irregularity at all. Instead, they emitted a mysterious aura, as if they had formed an incomparably mysterious and complete whole. It was as if they could faintly connect with the great Tao in the dark. These meteorites were of different sizes, but the actual difference in size was not the same as the size of their light source. Some meteorites were incomparably huge, but the light they represented was only the size of a fist. Some meteorites were only a few dozen feet in radius, but the light they represented was incomparably huge, as big as the moon. The difference between them was extremely mysterious, and it contained some kind of indescribable mystery. The meteorites in this meteorite belt were extremely large. The loss of 12,960 meteorites was not a big deal to the entire meteorite belt. However, the hole formed by the 12,960 meteorites was like an isolated island on a river. Instead, it caused the flow of the meteorite belt to change drastically. It could no longer flow as smoothly as before, and it caused an extremely violent reaction. Countless meteorites collided with the 12,960 meteorites, crumbled, scattered, collided again, crumbled again, scattered again. The cycle repeated itself, almost never stopping. Luo Fan did not care about this at all. He raised his head and looked at the void above him. He saw that the terrifying aura was constantly condensing, and the power that was preparing to strike him was growing and condensing at every moment. It was no different from when it was on the planet. It was as if it had appeared in this place since the beginning. As expected, it moves with me. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. After this thought, he no longer cared about the power that was condensing above his head. He took a light step forward, and his figure, along with the 12,960 meteorites around him, directly crossed the void and appeared on the side of the meteorite belt that was closer to the star. The entire process was still as smooth as flowing water. It was no different from when Luo Fan crossed the void from the planet's surface to the meteorite belt. It was as if the 12,960 envoys did not exist at all. After losing the 12,960 meteorites, the meteorite belt trembled slightly before returning to its calm state. It was as smooth as before, as if nothing had happened. The 12,960 envoys were only an insignificant part of the meteorite belt. The reason why the meteorites in the meteorite belt kept attacking them was because the way they were arranged was completely out of the meteorite belt. They were equivalent to huge foreign objects in the meteorite belt, so they naturally caused the meteorite belt to attack them. Their departure was equivalent to the foreign objects being pushed away, and the meteorite belt naturally returned to its calm state. After arriving outside the meteorite belt, Luo Fan raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The origin light of the meteorites trembled slightly, and countless law threads instantly shot out. As these threads shot out, the 12,960 meteorites began to shake violently. In the process of this shaking, countless meteorite fragments scattered from these meteorites, as if all the meteorites were collapsing in some strange way. Luo Fan shot out more and more threads of law, and the tremors of those meteorites became more and more intense. More and more meteorite fragments were scattered from them. After these fragments broke away from the meteorites, they were naturally pushed out of the 12,960 meteorites and dispersed in the void. In the end, they either turned into stardust, were attracted to the star in the center, or were wrapped by the meteorite belt and attached to the meteorites. However, Luo Fan didn't care about these meteorite fragments at this time. He continuously weaved the law threads he took out from the meteorites in a mysterious way in front of him, gradually forming 12,960 light balls that were countless times smaller than the previous light balls, but were many times more condensed. These balls of light were so condensed that they had even condensed to the point of becoming solid, as if they were crystals. The original light balls were too big, so time gradually passed as the law threads were reconstructed. In the blink of an eye, a year had passed. In total, there was only a year and a half left before the terrifying power that emitted a terrifying aura would truly condense and deal a devastating blow to Luo Fan. At this moment, the 12,960 meteorites outside the meteorite belt had already completely disappeared. They had turned into countless meteorite fragments that scattered in all directions and could no longer be seen. In front of Luo Fan, who was floating in the middle, there were 12,960 strange crystal stones. These crystals came in different sizes, but the bigger ones were no bigger than a fist, while the smaller ones were no smaller than a thumb. These crystals were extremely mysterious, as if they were the toughest matter in the universe. Even if the universe was destroyed, they wouldn't be damaged at all. However, they also seemed like illusory shadows that would occasionally distort slightly, making them seem rather illusory. These crystals were none other than the objects formed by the law threads that Luo Fan had reconstructed. The law threads had been reconstructed from the meteorite's origin, so it was naturally impossible to completely replicate the structure of the meteorite's origin. In fact, the construction method of the law threads to form these crystals was extremely mysterious. Not only did it contain the various unfathomable powers of the meteorite's origin, but Luo Fan had also added countless of his own understandings and engraved countless mysterious runes on them. He had also added countless mysteries of the great Tao that he had comprehended, so the essence of the crystals had been enhanced by thousands of times. Runes were the carriers of information that were most compatible with the mysteries of the great Tao in this universe. Hence, the most efficient way to refine magic tools and set up formations in this universe was to use runes. Hence, the runes on these crystals were not because Luo Fan had deliberately not used his other methods, such as formation patterns or three-dimensional talismans. Instead, it was because only by using these runes would he be able to raise the efficiency to the highest, allowing the power of the magic tools that he was about to refine to the greatest. These crystals formed an extremely mysterious arrangement in the void. This arrangement was similar to an extremely simple rune, but it also seemed like an indescribably exquisite formation. It was more like an indescribable trace of the Tao. They were not stationary in the void. Instead, they were vibrating slightly in a strange way, and there seemed to be some kind of strange connection between them. It was as if the 12,960 crystals were only a small part of the entire crystal. Luo Fan stood in the void and gently waved his hand. The 12,960 crystals began to move rapidly and collide with each other, producing strange sounds of collision. After a few breaths, they had collided and assembled together, directly forming a spherical crystal in front of him. This spherical crystal was complete and flawless. It was impossible to tell that it was constructed from 12,960 crystals. Instead, it seemed to be naturally perfect, without the slightest crack or deviation. Chapter 6:29. Tribulation. Under this strange phenomenon, the void within a radius of 10 million kilometers seemed to have completely separated from the Earth's universe. Instead, it was completely assimilated by the spherical crystal, becoming a part of it. Luo Fan raised his hand and waved, and the crystal fell into his hand. The entire crystal was the size of a human head. It was crystal clear and extremely mysterious. There were faint specks of light shining inside, as if they were swimming in some strange pattern. Luo Fan looked at the crystal, and a faint smile appeared on his face. This crystal was none other than a magic tool that he had refined with the help of the 12,960 meteorites over the past year or so. This magic tool didn't have any restrictions inside, but it wasn't like those crude artifacts that didn't even have restrictions. It was because it was crude. It was because the internal structure of this magic tool was directly based on the laws and reached the essence of its existence. The moment it was formed, it was directly connected to the Great Tao. When it was used, it could naturally borrow the power of the Great Tao, and it possessed supreme power. Under such circumstances, there was naturally no need for any restrictions to display its power. The reason why restrictions were so important to magic tools was because they were the reason why magic tools were extraordinary. They were also the fundamental power of magic tools. For ordinary magic tools, their power was determined by the restrictions contained inside. The type of the restrictions determined the power of the magic tool, and the number of restrictions determined the power of the magic tool. However, for a magic tool that could directly communicate with the Great Tao without any restrictions and possessed supreme power, restrictions were naturally not necessary. Luo Fan carefully sensed it, and all the functions of this magic tool appeared in his mind in an instant. After understanding its power, a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He was a little more confident about whether he could survive the great calamity in a year and a half. Lifting his head to look at the sky, he could see that the terrifying aura was still gathering above his head. Compared to a year and a half ago, this energy was much stronger, and the terrifying aura that covered the sky was several times stronger than before. At this moment, under this power, Luo Fan faintly felt his heart palpitate, as if an indescribable danger was approaching him step by step. Feeling the terror of this power, Luo Fan sighed. The confidence that he had just gained was suppressed a little. He sat cross-legged in the air, and with a thought, he summoned the magic tool he had just forged. It floated 3 feet in front of him, level with his eyes. Following that, his body flickered with golden radiance. The 5 halos behind his head trembled slightly, and the 3 halos within them began to mysteriously open and close. Every time the 5 halos flickered, bits of light would leave the halos and float towards the magic tool. Every time the 3 halos within the halos opened and closed, flower petals would fall from them, penetrate the halos, and float towards the magic tool. The golden radiance shining from his body was overwhelming, and it directly enveloped the magic tool. The bits of light, along with the flower petals and endless golden radiance, constantly poured into the magic tool. With the influx of all kinds of strange existences, the crystal ball-like magic tool began to produce all kinds of inexplicable changes. Strange threads began to appear out of thin air inside and on the surface of the magic tool, and began to swim and shuttle in some mysterious way that could not be described with words. As these threads swam and shuttled, the bits of light inside the magic tool began to interact with the light from the outside, the flower petals, and the golden radiance. This interaction caused the mysterious aura that the magic tool exuded to constantly grow. At the same time, the tens of millions of miles of the void that the magic tool naturally affected began to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, although the scope of its influence was shrinking, the strength of its influence was constantly increasing. If it was said that the void within a radius of tens of millions of miles had become independent and existed outside of the Earth's universe, after it shrank, it was as if the void within the area affected by the artifact was giving birth to another universe, giving birth to other infinite stars that were different from the Earth's universe. During this process, the power that emitted a terrifying aura seemed to be slowly dispersing from its original focus on Luo Fan's body, and gradually dispersed to the vast area of the void around Luo Fan that was affected by the magic tool. It was as if, in the eyes of that power, the void had gradually become a part of Luo Fan's body. This change continued without end. After a year and a half, the void affected by the magic tool had shrunk to only an acre of land around his body. Although it was still very large compared to his body, it had shrunk hundreds of millions of times compared to the void with a radius of tens of millions of miles. At this moment, the power that was emitting a terrifying aura had completely shifted its focus on Luo Fan to the surrounding space of an acre. Its focus on Luo Fan was only equivalent to locking onto any part of the space within an acre of an acre. Obviously, after a year and a half of sacrificial refinement, Luo Fan had completely fused the surrounding void of an acre with the magic tool, and at the same time, he had completely fused the magic tool with himself. At this moment, this magic tool was equivalent to a part of his body, a part of his soul, and even a part of his leakless golden core. After a year and a half of sacrificial refinement, the crystal ball-like magic tool had also undergone an inexplicable change. The entire crystal ball wasn't translucent and crystalline any longer, and it had become bright golden instead. Moreover, it emanated an aura that was flawless, immortal, and invulnerable. It was like a natural leakless golden core that was the size of a human head. The void of an acre around Luo Fan's body had already become an incomparably complete world, but it seemed illusory and unreal. This world was also a void, just like the void of the Earth's universe. However, there were tiny specks of light in this void. Some of these specks of light were extremely scattered, while some were gathered in one place, forming a special whole according to some special method. If one were to carefully distinguish their distribution, it would be almost exactly the same as the distribution of galaxies and stellar systems in the Earth's universe. If these specks of light were to be magnified hundreds of millions of times, one would be able to easily see that these specks of light were actually stars. Even around the stars there were planets that were as small as dust. Obviously, the void of an acre around Luo Fan's body had been turned into another universe similar to the Earth's universe by the mysterious function of the magic tool. Of course, although this universe was already quite large, it was only formed by a magic tool after all. There might be countless shadows of living beings in it, but it was still impossible for real living beings to exist. It was still too difficult for the current Luo Fan to give birth to real living beings in this universe and truly turn it into a complete universe. At the very least, he would have to wait for this magic tool to truly become a magic treasure before there was even a trace of a possibility. In fact, Luo Fan boldly guessed that even if it was upgraded to a magic treasure, it would not be possible for it to be an immortal treasure. At the very least, it would have to be upgraded to a Tai profound treasure to barely be able to do it. Luo Fan opened his eyes and quietly looked at this magic tool that was like a connate leakless gold core. He carefully felt the feeling that was transmitted from it as if it was his own hands and feet, and he was quite satisfied in his heart. When this magic tool had just been successfully refined, it had already surged a lot to him, but it was only now that it could be regarded as something that he could rely on to pass the tribulation. Although this magic tool was quite useful and could be considered his magic tool, he couldn't control it perfectly because it didn't have any spiritual consciousness. He couldn't really condense its own power either. Although it was useful to him, it wouldn't be very effective against the upcoming tribulation. Only at this moment did he completely fuse this magic artifact with his body and mind, allowing this magic artifact to truly become a part of his body and mind. He allowed his body and mind to enter the magic artifact and completely control even the slightest changes in the magic artifact. In this way, he would be able to condense the magic artifact's functions and allow the magic artifact's might to be completely brought forth. Only then would he be able to truly rely on it to deal with the upcoming tribulations. After carefully sensing it, just as Luo Fan was about to stand up, he suddenly felt an indescribable terror descend from the sky and invade his heart in an instant. It made him feel as if his entire mind were suddenly thrown into the 18 layers of hell, as if there were hundreds of millions of existences in the void that could tear him into pieces, sharpening their knives and staring at him. With the invasion of this terror, Luo Fan instantly understood. The tribulation had arrived. He used his own tenacity to break through the limit and even triggered the Great Tribulation to escape from that terror. He looked up, his eyes penetrating the universe formed by the magic tool, and saw the power that had been condensed for 3 years and was emitting a terrifying aura. Sure enough, the power that had been condensed for 3 years had condensed and formed in that instant. The terrifying aura that it exuded had skyrocketed tens of thousands of times because of its formation. It covered the sky and covered the earth, covering the void of an acre around Luo Fan's body. It was precisely because the terrifying aura had suddenly increased to such an extent that when the void of an acre had been split up to bear it together, it still made Luo Fan feel that kind of feeling. Luo Fan looked at the power and slowly stood up. He raised his hand and pointed at the magic tool that was like a natural leakless gold core. The magic tool emitted endless golden light that directly connected to every light spot in this 1-acre universe, which was to say, to every star. As the golden light connected, the entire 1-acre universe shook slightly, and its strength instantly increased by tens of thousands of times. The entire universe became an incomparably complete entity at this moment, as if it had become a strange creature. The power that emitted the terrifying aura was like a strange planet. The way it appeared was as if it was slowly squeezed into this universe from an inexplicable place. Slowly, bit by bit, it appeared from the void. As it appeared, the terrifying aura skyrocketed at an unimaginable speed. This aura was so strong that it caused countless fine cracks to appear in the void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles. Then, it gradually began to collapse, turning into countless spatial fragments. The radius of hundreds of millions of miles was nothing compared to the void of the universe. The greatest impact was only on the surrounding asteroid belt. It did not even affect the sun in the center, nor the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined behind the asteroid belt. Light traveled 300,000 kilometers in a second, and hundreds of millions of miles were only a few hundred seconds for light. The distance between this asteroid belt and the central star would take light tens of minutes to travel. Although it was not that far from the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense doppelganger had refined, it would still take a few minutes to reach it. Such a long distance obviously could not be affected by the terrifying aura produced by the planet squeezing into the void. The asteroid belt was affected by this aura, and the asteroids within it continued to collapse at an unimaginable speed. The entire asteroid belt was cut off by the terrifying aura in an instant. The asteroids that were enveloped by the terrifying aura completely collapsed in an instant, turning into stardust. However, the stardust did not scatter in all directions, but was directly swallowed up by the countless cracks created by the collapse of the void. In the end, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never been there. The asteroid belt did not stop moving because of this change. Instead, there were still asteroids falling into this region from behind, and they were constantly being destroyed, swallowed, and finally disappeared. However, although the asteroids were moving at a fast speed, it was still on the grand scale of the universe after all. In a short period of time, it was impossible for too many asteroids to fall into this region. Therefore, in the process of the terrifying aura constantly squeezing into the void, only a few dozen asteroids falling into the region from outside were destroyed and swallowed. As the celestial force continued to squeeze into the void, the terrifying aura grew stronger and stronger. The pressure on the surrounding void became more and more astonishing, and the void was naturally stirred more and more violently. The void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles also became more and more chaotic. Previously, it was only the void that was collapsing because of the cracks. When the celestial body completely appeared, the void within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles had completely turned into a paste. Even time seemed to have been completely minced, and fused with the minced space, matter, yuan qi, power, and various other existences. However, this kind of fusion was not a state of chaos, but an extremely serious state of chaos. This state possessed unfathomable destructive power, but it was impossible for a cultivator to comprehend the mysteries of chaos, and it was even more impossible for a cultivator to evolve a universe within it. It only possessed destruction and destruction. Right in the middle of this incomparably chaotic state, below the celestial body, was a cosmos with a circumference of an acre. Like an indestructible reef, no matter how the chaotic state struck, it did not waver, nor was it damaged in the slightest. Luo Fan was currently sitting cross-legged in the center of this universe. He raised his head, and his gaze pierced through the universe, looking directly at the celestial body, and observing every trace of change on it. In front of him, the artifact that resembled an innate leakless golden core was emitting boundless golden light, connecting every star in this universe, and gathering all the energy to stabilize this universe. No matter how the chaotic state of chaos struck it, it did not waver or retreat in the slightest. Luo Fan gazed at the celestial body, his eyes flashing with boundless wisdom. The mystical perspective brought about by his mastery of the five Qis unification allowed him to directly see through the origin of this celestial body. The essence of this celestial body was just a solid object that was as black as ink. This solid object was not a physical existence, but the condensation of boundless laws, and boundless mysteries. Its essence was the materialization of a certain power that surpassed the limits. The terrifying aura that completely shattered the space within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles, and formed a state of chaos that could devour and destroy everything, was emitted by this inky black object. Such a huge celestial body was just another manifestation of this force in the Earth universe. Just as Luo Fan was carefully analyzing the essence of the celestial body had completely squeezed into the void, and completely appeared in the void of the Earth's universe. At the same time, it caused the environment within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles to become even more chaotic, and even emitted some chaotic aura. After the celestial body completely appeared, it trembled, and slowly pressed down towards the cosmos that was the size of an acre below it. In the process of pressing down, that terrifying aura gradually concentrated on this cosmos, causing the range of chaos to gradually shrink instead. Although the chaos that escaped from the scope of the terrifying aura did not directly restore order, it gradually began to change. Time and space were the first to transform into order. This caused that when the celestial body began to press down, that glue-like state began to gradually change in color from the outermost layer. The deeper inside, the darker the color, and the lighter the color. The celestial body was originally a few hundred miles away from Luo Fan. When Luo Fan gradually formed the cosmos that was the size of an acre, the distance also gradually increased. When it finally stabilized, it was already more than 5,000 miles away. Compared to the celestial body that had a diameter of 10,000 miles, what kind of distance was that? In just a few dozen breaths, it was directly crushed by the celestial body. When the celestial body was about to come into contact with the cosmos that was the size of an acre, that terrifying aura that shook the heavens and the earth had already completely condensed above the cosmos. The terrifying aura that was originally scattered over a radius of hundreds of millions of miles had converged to the size of an acre. One could imagine how many times its strength had increased. Chapter 630. Under the terrifying aura that was concentrated in one spot, the 1-acre universe shook violently. All the stars within it and the entire void began to shake and tremble. This shaking and trembling was directly transmitted to the connate seamless golden core ritual artifact in front of Luo Fan. The Dharma artifact also began to shake strangely. Seeing this, Luo Fan had a thought, and his unimaginable will instantly spread out. In an instant, it traveled through the entire 1-acre universe and penetrated into every inch of the void. As if binding, it directly froze the entire universe, causing the various vibrations in the void and stars to disappear in an instant. The entire universe instantly stabilized, and no matter how much the terrifying aura suppressed it, it did not budge at all. After this, Luo Fan's will did not stop. Instead, it continued to penetrate deeper into the universe. It directly penetrated into the universe, twisting the power within the universe into one and directly forming a thin barrier outside the universe. This barrier was faintly discernible and was a transparent and colorless existence. It was tens of thousands of times thinner than a piece of paper. However, its sturdiness had reached an earth-shattering level. It was condensed from the power of the universe and was hundreds of millions of times harder than the so-called diamond. Even if the void was destroyed and collapsed, it would not be able to destroy it. For this universe, such a sturdy barrier was naturally not an easy thing to do. At this moment, the entire universe had long been pushed to its limits, and its speed of development was unimaginably fast. The entire universe had unknowingly reached tens of millions of times its original size, and almost the entire universe was aging at a speed visible to the naked eye. And in front of Luo Fan, the connate's seamless golden core ritual was rapidly evolving. The endless light within it flickered wildly, and the speed at which it flickered was tens of thousands of times faster than before. As the light flickered, the surging core chi within Luo Fan's body disappeared at an unimaginable speed. If it was not for the fact that Luo Fan had already completed the 3 flowers at one's prominence and 5 chis collecting one's essence, it would only take a few breaths for him to be sucked dry. He might even directly collapse and disappear, dying. But even so, Luo Fan had a grave expression on his face at this moment. Clearly, even though he could endure all of this, the pressure on him was extremely great. At this moment, the celestial body condensed from energy collided with the universe. An earth-shattering rumble spread out in all directions, and the space that was gradually recovering its order suddenly trembled. Then, it instantly became 1,000 times more chaotic than when it was at its peak. A dense chaotic aura rose into the sky, causing the chaotic state within a radius of several 100 million kilometers to instantly return to its most fundamental chaotic state. Previously, it was only the terrifying aura emitted by the celestial body that caused the void to fall into a chaotic state. It wasn't even a terrifying aura that targeted the void. At this moment, the only thing that affected this chaotic state was the shockwave produced by this astral body attack. Its strength was naturally many times stronger than the terrifying aura that was unintentionally emitted. It was also very natural for it to cause such consequences. Or rather, it should be said that it was only normal for it to cause such consequences. If it did not cause such consequences, it would instead make people wonder if they were hallucinating. The shockwave became stronger and more intense. In the end, the moment it appeared, it broke through a certain limit and naturally gave birth to spiritual sense. After the shockwave gave birth to spiritual sense, the damage it caused to the surroundings did not increase at all. Instead, it rapidly weakened. All of the shockwaves that gave birth to spiritual sense cheered and jumped in joy. They suddenly turned around in a way that went against the laws of the universe and charged towards the cosmos that had collided with the celestial body. This disaster was caused by Luo Fan's powerful will, which had instinctively attacked the Grand Tao. He wanted to obtain the mysteries of the origin heaven from the Grand Tao that could match the strength of his will. This was the backlash of the Grand Tao. It could be said that the appearance of this power was the manifestation of a certain aspect of the Grand Tao. As such, the creation of these shockwaves could be said to be naturally formed by the Grand Tao from a certain perspective. It was precisely because of this that after these shockwaves broke through a certain limit and obtained the support of the Grand Tao, they were naturally different from other shockwaves. Their spiritual sense was clearer, more complete, and more targeted. Only this kind of clear, complete, and targeted spiritual sense could allow these shockwaves to return without any waste and join in the attack on the cosmos. The moment these shockwaves collided with the cosmos, they naturally condensed and turned into billions of strange creatures that began to attack the cosmos. These creatures were all very strange. Some were Luo Fan had seen before, and some were things that Luo Fan could not even dream of. However, whether it was what Luo Fan had seen or what he had never imagined in his dreams, these creatures were all natural and reasonable, conforming to a certain rule in the Earth's universe. They could develop from the simplest single-celled life form to the billions of forms they had at this moment in a certain way. Furthermore, every single one of these creatures possessed unimaginable power. Each of them condensed their own power and continuously attacked the barrier of the cosmos. The impact was no less than the impact of the celestial body on the cosmos. At that moment, Luo Fan, who was in the middle of the cosmos, had his eyes wide open. He gave off an unyielding aura. Power and core qi surged around him, and his body shone with golden light. The 5 halos behind his head spun and vibrated even faster, and the time between the 3 flowers opening and closing became shorter. The petals that floated out became even more numerous. They simply turned into a monstrous river that rushed from the halos into the magic tool in front of him. At that moment, the golden light that the magic tool emitted had become countless times stronger. It connected all the voids in the entire universe, and the power of the various stars had become much stronger. But even so, the entire universe was still trembling and shaking. It was so much so that the countless stars in the void were extinguishing at an unimaginable speed, collapsing and dying. In the blink of an eye, the outermost ring of stars that was closest to the edge of the universe, which contained billions of stars, had been completely extinguished. Even with the magic tool, the stars in other locations were still constantly dimming, and they were getting closer and closer to being extinguished. From these changes, it was easy to see just how terrifying the collision of the celestial body was to the universe. When things reached an extreme, they would move in the opposite direction. Great skill seemed clumsy, great wisdom seemed foolish, and great sound had no sound. When the exquisiteness of an attack reached a certain limit, it would instead seem crude and simple. At that moment, the natural backlash from the great Tao was like this. The strength of that power was naturally beyond the imagination of all creatures. As it was produced by the great Tao, the various truths and mysteries contained within it were naturally imaginable. However, the attack that was produced by such a mysterious and exquisite power was like a celestial body crashing into it. There was not a single trace of technique involved, nor were there any ingenious changes. It was as if it could be easily dodged. However, this was only an illusion. The attack seemed crude and simple, but the exquisiteness and profoundness contained within it were so profound that even Luo Fan could not completely comprehend it. He only knew that no matter where he fled to, even if he traveled through time and space to return to the past or the future billions of years later, he would not be able to escape this wave of attack. Whether he fled to the depths of the universe or another grotto heaven, he would not be able to escape this attack. This was something he was completely certain of the moment the terrifying aura began to condense. As such, although the attack seemed crude and simple, Luo Fan could not avoid it at all. He could only face it head-on and fuse his own power with the magic tool that he had refined over the past 3 years to face this power head-on. Luo Fan's universe contained boundless mysteries. If it was allowed to grow in the future, it could even grow into a major 1,000 worlds that were only slightly inferior to Earth's universe. It could even give birth to countless powerful cultivators that shook the heavens and the earth. It was obvious how high its essence was. Although the power was born from the great Tao and possessed unbelievable might, it was not the great Tao after all. Its essence was only the power of an innate zenith heaven cultivator. No matter how powerful it was, it could not be at the level of a saint. This kind of restriction made it so that although this power had an overwhelming might towards Luo Fan, it wasn't absolutely invincible. It wasn't a power that Luo Fan couldn't resist or deal with. As a result, although the universe that Luo Fan had created with the help of the magic tool shook under the impact of the power, the celestial body underwent various changes from the collision. Countless fragments continuously fell off the surface of the celestial body and turned into powder from the collision. In the end, they disappeared and returned to the great Tao. The celestial body looked like a celestial body, but in reality, it was just something formed from a wave of power. Its essence was a condensed body of laws that was like black jade. The fragments that fell off were threads of laws that were constantly being knocked away and left the black jade. What appeared was that there were billions of threads flickering on the surface of the celestial body. Every single thread was so profound, like marks of the Tao. As they streaked across the surface of the celestial body, they revealed endless indescribable profundities. These threads were formed when the fragments left the celestial body. It could be said that they were engraved on the celestial body during the collision. The creation of each thread caused the celestial body to tremble strangely. This kind of tremble was different from the tremble caused by the collision. This kind of vibration was extremely mysterious. It directly passed through the infinite distance and was transmitted to the magic tool that was floating in front of Luo Fan, which was like a connate seamless golden core. Threads naturally appeared on the magic tool, adding a series of faintly discernible, illusory, and real strange patterns to the magic tool. Each of these patterns could be found in the threads that appeared on the celestial body. Even though there were some changes, they did not go beyond the essence and were still the same thread. The appearance of these patterns caused the magic tool's essence to undergo some kind of strange change without anyone noticing. This change seemed to be the magic tool undergoing some kind of crucial transformation, as if it was undergoing some kind of indescribable evolution. There seemed to be some kind of mysterious existence brewing inside it that could be born at any time and cause this magic tool to undergo a shocking change. At this moment, Luo Fan was wholeheartedly using this magic tool. Every change in this magic tool could not escape his senses. The moment these patterns appeared, he had sensed them. And the moment these patterns appeared, he had sensed the changes to the magic tool. The moment the magic tool changed, he couldn't help but show an inexplicable joy on his face. If other cultivators on Earth had sensed the changes in this magic tool, they might not have been able to understand what these changes were. However, Luo Fan immediately understood why these changes occurred and what kind of effects they would have. This change was clearly the magic tool's essence slowly improving. This magic tool was transforming into a true magic treasure. What was brewing inside the magic tool was a treasure spirit of a magic treasure. As long as that spirit was born, this magic tool would no longer be a magic tool. Instead, it would become a true magic treasure and its power would instantly increase by tens of thousands of times. How could he not be happy about this? The reason for this change and opportunity was because the patterns on the celestial body were produced by the collision between the celestial body and the celestial body. Even though this phenomenon was due to the boundless mysteries contained within the celestial body itself, it was born because of the collision. Since it was a collision, there was a mutual effect. The patterns that appeared on the celestial body, through the influence of a more fundamental law, naturally acted on the other body that collided with the celestial body's universe. The universe itself was completely one with the magic tool, so it naturally appeared on the magic tool. The reason behind this was extremely mysterious and wonderful. It could be said that it was a coincidence, but it could also be said that everything had a chance of survival. As for how to understand this, it was up to the benevolent to the wise to see. After obtaining this benefit, Luo Fan's confidence became even stronger. As a result, his will became even more tenacious, and his potential, which had already been squeezed to the limit, grew once again. In addition, the power of the magic tool became even more powerful because of the countless patterns, causing the barrier outside of the 1-acre universe to become even more solid. Although the barrier didn't completely block the celestial body, it also slowed down the growth of the vibrations caused by the celestial body's collision. This caused the countless waves of spiritual awareness to be unable to affect the barrier, causing the speed at which the barrier was breaking to slow down a lot. The celestial body was unimaginably strong. Although it was being blocked, it still continued to move down at a slow speed, continuously crushing the barrier. The barrier slowly caved in, causing layers of wrinkles to appear on the surface. It was as if it could be crushed at any time and collapse at any time. The stars and the void within the universe became more and more intense, but as the magic tool strengthened, the extent of the increase became smaller and smaller. This process continued, and in the blink of an eye, several hours had passed. After several hours, the consciousness of the universe was like a thin piece of paper stuck to the surface of the celestial body. However, the universe barrier had unknowingly been crushed into a huge arc-shaped pit, sticking to the other side of the universe. This universe was only the size of an acre, while the celestial body was tens of thousands of miles in diameter. Comparing the two, it was like comparing a spherical sesame to a basketball. One could imagine how terrifying the crushing strength of such a difference was. Under such circumstances, it took several hours to crush the celestial body. No matter how strong the universe barrier was, to be crushed to such an extent, it could be said that the toughness of the universe barrier was astonishing. However, the universe was not a sesame seed or a ball. Although the outer layer of the barrier had been crushed to such an extent that it was almost touching the bottom, the void within the universe still existed. Although it was extremely distorted, and the positions of the stars that still existed seemed to have been stretched, flattened, and rearranged, they still existed. They did not disappear because the barrier of the universe had been crushed into thin pieces. The changes in these few hours were not completely beneficial to the celestial body. During these few hours of collision and crushing, the celestial body had shrunk a lot, and the threads and traces that appeared on its surface were even denser. It was as if every inch of the surface of the celestial body had been plowed, causing the surface of the celestial body to become almost identical to before. It was like a completely unfamiliar celestial body. With such a large number of traces appearing on the surface of the celestial body, the magic tool that was connected to the celestial body through some special method naturally underwent earth-shattering changes. At this moment, the magical artifact that looked like a connate leakless golden core had completely changed its appearance. Countless veined patterns appeared on both the core and the surface of the magic tool, making it seem as if the magic tool had been constructed from countless veined patterns. The glittering golden magic tool became transparent again during this process. The golden light seemed to have completely condensed into one of the veined patterns. Even the boundless golden light from the artifact, which connected every inch of the void and every star in the universe, seemed to be emitted from these patterns. Moreover, at this moment, the changes brewing inside the magic tool had also reached its peak, as if it was only a small touch away from breaking through its limits. Chapter 670 Treasure Transformation. Chapter 631 Final break. Right at this moment, Luo Fan's heart suddenly stirred. With a single thought, his extraordinary will suddenly shook, and suddenly turned into a line that rushed towards the ritual tool. In an instant it entered the ritual tool. As these powerful wills surged in, the magic tool suddenly trembled. In an instant it broke through some mysterious and indescribable limit. The veined patterns that had appeared inside and outside the magic tool over the past few hours instantly connected together. As the will circulated, it began to shine with an indescribable light. This light was so mysterious that it seemed to illuminate the void of the universe several light years away in an instant. Within this space of a few light years, there were stars, planets, meteorite belts, satellites, and even planets that created the state of chaos within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles. However, no matter what kind of existence it was unable to obstruct this light at all. Under this light, distance seemed to no longer exist. This distance of several light years was something that even light would need several years to cover. However, it only took an instant for it to be illuminated by this mysterious and incredible light. Even though this light was so mysterious, it was faintly discernible. Where there was light, it was easily suppressed by other light. As long as any creature didn't look carefully, they would overlook it. Even in the boundless void where there was no light, it seemed extremely weak, and it was extremely easy to overlook. However, as long as there were living beings that did not overlook this light, they would discover just how vast and mysterious this light was. The light was filled with world-shaking, limitless vitality. If someone with extraordinary talent could comprehend one or two of the mysteries within, they would be able to embark on the path of cultivation and cultivate great divine powers. Unfortunately, even though the light covered an area that was several light years wide, it was still too small compared to the scale of the entire universe. Within these several light years, there was only one star system, and within this star system, there was only the planet where Luo Fan's consciousness clone resided. There was an extremely simple primeval lifeform existing, but it was impossible for it to comprehend the mysteries within this light, let alone comprehend any profound techniques from it. Therefore, even though this light was mysterious, it was only the same as ordinary light in this universe. Apart from the area it covered, and the speed it covered was unimaginably fast, amidst this light, the countless patterns within the magic tool turned from illusion to reality. They directly turned into real and strange existences, and began to appear inside and outside the magic tool. This change caused the void around the magic tool to be filled with countless lines. These lines were so mysterious and so tenacious, as if they were formed by the condensation of countless purest forces through some indescribable change. It was as if even the destruction of the universe could not destroy them. After these lines appeared, they suddenly shrank and instantly shrunk into the magic tool, wrapping up the endless starry light within the magic tool. Even the golden light that the magic tool emitted to the outside world, which froze the entire void of the universe and mobilized all the forces within the void of the universe to form a universe barrier outside the universe, was also retracted during this process. The golden light drilled into the magic tool again, and continued to penetrate deeper into the magic tool. Finally, it reached a mysterious void in the depths of the magic tool. When these lines and the light entered that mysterious void, everything had shrunk into an extremely tiny, faintly discernible dot. At the same time, the super-strong willpower that Luo Fan had poured into the magic tool was like a meteorite falling from the ninth heaven, crashing into the void with a loud bang, directly colliding with the faintly discernible, tiny dot. A loud cracking sound rang out. This small dot suddenly exploded under the impact of the super-strong willpower. This explosion borrowed the light that had spread out for several light years, and in an instant it scattered all the light, causing the originally mysterious light to scatter into specks of starry light. Finally, it merged with the magic tool, causing the entire magic tool to instantly change shape. As the small dot exploded, it was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. An indescribably mysterious existence slowly walked out from the void, becoming more and more obvious and larger. In the end, it broke through the void in the depths of the enchanted artifact and fused with it, causing the entire enchanted artifact to instantly change its form. This caused the magic tool to also transform into the appearance of that existence, or rather, into the body of that existence. That existence was none other than a humanoid creature that looked like a child. At this moment, the magical artifact had already transformed into a boy who looked about 6 or 7 years old. His entire body was shining with a bright light, and his face was crystal clear. He had a pure and adorable appearance, and he was chubby. This child was none other than the treasure spirit that had just been born in this magic tool. And the birth of a treasure spirit in this magic tool meant that this magic tool had truly successfully transformed into a magic tool with unlimited power. After this child appeared, there was an incomparably joyous smile on his face. With a tremble, he naturally dispersed, turning into an invisible light barrier that directly enveloped Luo Fan. And at this moment, because the power of the barrier of the universe had already been separated from the magic tool during the transformation process, the entire barrier had already become many times weaker. Under the crushing of the celestial body, it instantly collapsed. And with the collapse of the barrier of the universe, the celestial body, the spiritual state caused by the celestial body, and the impact waves that were produced by the collision earlier, all broke through the barrier in an instant, all surging into this universe. If the celestial body was only an ordinary celestial body, then even if it had a diameter of tens of thousands of miles, it would naturally be restricted by the laws of this universe. It would naturally be turned into an extremely tiny dot, becoming an ordinary celestial body in this universe. Instead, the distance between it and Luo Fan would increase by countless folds. But it was clear that although the celestial body looked like a celestial body, it was only the appearance of the backlash from the great Tao. In essence, it was still the same force, a powerful force that could instantly shatter the space within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles with just the terrifying aura it emitted, turning it into a chaotic state. Such a power could not even be restrained by the laws of Earth's universe. How could it possibly be restrained by this magic tool that was only the size of an acre? Hence, when the celestial body squeezed through the barrier of the universe and entered this universe, the entire universe trembled violently. Billions of tiny stars completely collapsed in an instant, and the void of this universe was also instantly turned into a chaotic state. The chaotic state interweaved with the spiritual state from the outside world, instantly plunging this universe into a state of great destruction. And the impact waves that were produced by the collision were like tigers entering a flock of sheep, blotting out the sky and covering the earth as they wreaked havoc in this state of great destruction. In an instant, they drowned the entire universe. The moment the magic tool underwent a change and gave birth to a treasure spirit, it transformed into the boy, and the 1-acre universe was completely destroyed. In the entire universe, only the area of 30 feet around Luo Fan's body was barely able to expel the surrounding spiritual state due to the existence of a flawless existence, and still remained intact. But it was only temporary. The speed of the celestial body was not the slightest bit slower than the spiritual state. It was about to crush over and directly break through the obstruction of the flawless existence, and crush Luo Fan into smithereens. It was at this critical moment that the child transformed into a light barrier. When he transformed into a light barrier and enveloped Luo Fan, the celestial body had already crushed over, and directly crushed the light barrier. The light barrier trembled violently, but did not immediately collapse. Instead, a crisp and joyful laughter was emitted from within. Amidst the laughter, the light barrier began to change shape. In an instant, it transformed into a fine line that was 10 feet long, but the size of a speck of dust. Endless lines that were similar to the lines on the surface of the celestial body emerged, but possessed a different kind of profoundness. They interweaved with the lines on the surface of the celestial body, and in an instant, the celestial body was split open, and a fine crack that any living creature could ignore appeared on the surface of the celestial body. It directly drilled into the celestial body, and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye, as though it had never existed. Along with the disappearance of the celestial body, Luo Fan, who was within the light barrier, was naturally included. At this moment, all of Luo Fan's willpower was connected to the magic treasure, and all changes of the magic treasure were under his control. Although the treasure spirit had complete intelligence and a rather complete spiritual consciousness, it did not have self-awareness. The way Luo Fan's willpower was connected to it was through some indescribable and mysterious method, replacing its non-existent self-awareness. Therefore, it could be said that this magic treasure could be said to be Luo Fan, but Luo Fan was not this magic treasure. The mysteries of this were subtle and difficult to fathom. At this moment, within the thin line formed by the light barrier, there was a void with a radius of several zhang. This void was not vast, but the strength of the void was extremely shocking. The time within it was also extremely stable. This void was tens of thousands of times more stable than the void outside the Earth's universe, and the degree of time stability was also at least tens of thousands of times more stable than the outside world. A magic treasure could casually open up a boundless void. Even if it was not a natural magic treasure and could not open up a world, it could still form a vast, incomplete world. At this moment, this magic treasure was using this power to maintain the void within a radius of several zhang. The stability of the void and the degree of spacetime stability could reach such a level was extremely natural. At this moment, the endless lines outside the light barrier were constantly being emitted from the light barrier, constantly interweaving with the lines inside the surrounding celestial body, constantly moving and constantly combining. In this process of weaving, moving and combining, the thin line continued to penetrate into the celestial body, like a swimming dragon, meandering and quickly moving towards the central core of the celestial body. The celestial body itself was the materialization of a force. Its source was a mass of law threads interwoven into a solid ink, and its central core was the core of the endless law threads. As the thread continued to penetrate deeper, the natural and terrifying aura of the celestial body also continued to rise, shrink and gradually converge. It completely separated from the outside world, and entered the celestial body, constantly chasing after the thin line. At the same time, along with the terrifying aura, there was also an infinitely powerful shrinking and crushing force. Following this change, the spiritual state outside the celestial body lost its source of power, and gradually calmed down. As for the impact waves that appeared due to the collision, although they wanted to dive into the celestial body to continue chasing after Luo Fan, the nature of the impact wave itself caused them to be completely annihilated the moment they collided with the celestial body. There was not a single impact wave that could rush into the celestial body. Just like this, in just a few dozen breaths, all of the impact waves had been completely annihilated. At this moment, the spiritual state around the celestial body had calmed down a little, and the time within a radius of a few 100 million miles had returned to order. As time returned to order, space, and various kinds of energy just like that, dozens of breaths passed. Although the area within a radius of hundreds of millions of miles was still grayish, as if it was in a state of chaos, it was like a gray fog. The chaotic aura and spiritual aura that it emitted had already weakened to the point where it was almost non-existent. Although this change was incomparably huge, it was not difficult to understand. After all, the spiritual state itself was formed due to the terrifying aura emitted by the celestial body. At this moment, all of the terrifying aura had converged into the celestial body, and its influence on the outside world had completely disappeared. The spiritual state naturally lost its source of formation, and under the influence of the laws of the universe, it would naturally slowly return to order. After this change, the celestial body had become ordinary, like an ordinary celestial body that appeared in a gray fog. Apart from the countless patterns on its surface, there was nothing extraordinary about it. As for the gray fog, it was also gradually disappearing with the passage of time. According to the speed of its disappearance, it would only take a few days for it to completely disappear, and the celestial body would appear without any concealment. At that time, the celestial body would probably look like a meteorite that had separated from the meteorite belt beside it. Of course, this situation was under the premise that the celestial body would still exist after a few days. The changes in the outside world were no longer of any significance to Luo Fan at this moment. All of his attention was entangled with the power of the celestial body. The crushing power of the celestial body was unimaginably powerful. If it appeared in the outside world, time and space would collapse due to this crushing power, and there was even a slight possibility of returning to the chaos. With such a power completely placed on one's body, it was naturally a rather uncomfortable feeling. Fortunately, after this magic weapon became a magic treasure, its power had greatly increased. The spacetime of the void it opened up was far more stable than the outside world by tens of thousands of times. Although the crushing power was powerful, after layers of weakening in the outside world, it could no longer cause the spacetime of this void to collapse. Naturally, it could not affect Luo Fan's body at the center of this spacetime. The thing that greatly weakened the crushing power was none other than the countless patterns that appeared around the crushing power at all times. These patterns appeared at the same time as the patterns on the surface of the celestial body. Every pattern corresponded to the patterns on the surface of the celestial body, and they had the same profundity. Although the patterns on the surface of the celestial body were formed from the debris produced by the collision, they were essentially formed from the natural manifestation of the Grand Tao. They were already close to Tao marks, and their profundities could be imagined. In this way, the power of the patterns around the fine lines could be imagined. When they interweaved with the surrounding celestial body, they directly obtained a part of the power of the celestial body. Using this power to resist the crushing power of the celestial body, the effect was naturally quite shocking. Almost 99% of the crushing power was offset in this situation. 99% of the power was offset. Although the remaining crushing power was still earth-shattering, the impact on this magical tool was already within the range that it could bear. Naturally, it was impossible for it to hurt Luo Fan. In this way, Luo Fan drove this magic treasure deeper into the celestial body, and his speed was definitely not slow. A celestial body with a diameter of tens of thousands of kilometers was incomparably small in the universe, but for Luo Fan it was quite huge. Even though the fine line was advancing at a relatively fast speed, it still took several hours to finally drill into the core of the celestial body. The moment the fine line drilled into the core, the entire celestial body shook violently. In an instant it froze in the void. Then, the celestial body collapsed layer by layer from the outer ear. Countless fragments constantly left the celestial body, but they did not scatter in all directions. Instead, they arranged themselves in the surrounding void, and integrated into the surrounding gray mist. In the process of its collapse, strands of extremely complicated patterns constantly formed on the surface of the celestial body. The moment they formed, they completely disappeared, as if they had been absorbed into the celestial body. As the celestial body collapsed more and more, these patterns appeared more and more. In the end, after several dozen breaths, the entire celestial body had collapsed until only a sphere with a diameter of 3 meters was left. This sphere seemed to be constructed from the accumulation of patterns, the densely packed patterns completely concealing the material of the sphere itself. Such an image was already close to what Luo Fan had previously seen with his extraordinary perspective after his 5 cheese unifications. The essence of the celestial body was a sphere of laws. Strength is strength. Even if it is born of the great Tao, it is only a form of strength. A leisurely sigh suddenly sounded from within the sphere. Following this leisurely sigh, boundless golden light suddenly erupted from the center of the sphere, directly passing through the patterns that seemed to have no gaps at all, and illuminating an area of several 100 million kilometers. This golden light was so dazzling that it directly tore through the thick gray mist and illuminated the void of the universe. At this moment, this solar system seemed to have 2 stars. After this golden light, the entire sphere that seemed to be completely composed of patterns instantly shrank, and was finally completely replaced by a tiny, thumb-sized light shield. This process, with one look, showed that the entire sphere had been completely devoured by the light shield. Chapter 632. Seeking the Great Tao. Chapter 672. Seeking the Great Tao Tai was extremely mysterious. The moment it appeared, it naturally emitted an indescribably mysterious aura that shook the universe and the void. In an instant, the gray mist that shrouded a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers disappeared without a trace. Only the existence that emitted the aura of Tai appeared in the void, as if it had existed for eternity. Then, a leisurely long chant came from that location. All the strange phenomena instantly disappeared, and the figure of a boy replaced all of them, appearing in the void above that location. The boy's body shone with golden light, and he looked extremely adorable. He had grown 5 or 6 years older than before, growing from 5 to 12 years old to about 11 or 12 years old. After the boy appeared, his body trembled, and another figure walked out of his body. It was Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan's eyes were slightly dazed at that moment, and there seemed to be endless brilliance and endless profound mysteries flashing in them. After Luo Fan walked out, the boy turned around and turned into a faintly discernible spherical shadow. With a tremble, he rushed into the mud pill palace between Luo Fan's brows and disappeared into his body. Luo Fan, however, did not care about any of this, nor did he react at all. He merely sat cross-legged in the void, and the 5 halos behind his head began to spin rapidly, alternating and changing, while the 3 flowers among them rose and fell at an unimaginable speed. Following that, an invisible hole seemed to be torn open in the void. The appearance of this hole seemed to be completely independent of the Earth's universe. It did not affect the surrounding void at all, nor did it affect the surrounding origin chi or matter at all. Even the light emitted by the stars of this galaxy could not affect this hole. Behind the cave seemed to be a supreme existence that all cultivators and all living beings in the universe yearned for. Just a trace of its aura was sufficient to shake the universe and space itself, and it would allow all living beings to grow and improve beyond imagination. It was even to the extent that they might be able to obtain indescribable transcendence because of it. Yet the aura was so mysterious. It did not dissipate at all, but instead gathered in one place and constantly poured into the 5 halos behind Luo Fan's head, causing them to gradually undergo some kind of inexplicable change. This change did not cause the 5 halos to undergo some kind of inconceivable transformation. Instead, it caused the 5 halos to gradually interweave and merge together. The separation between the 5 halos became increasingly weak and blurry during this process. In the end, when the cave was completely opened, the 5 halos had almost merged into one. If one did not possess astonishing observation skills, it would be extremely difficult to tell that it was originally 5 halos. And the 3 flowers inside the halos were constantly undergoing some kind of inexplicable change during the process. This change caused the connection between the 3 flowers and the halos to become closer and closer. Just like the 5 halos, the boundary between them became more and more blurry, and the difference between them became smaller and smaller dozens of breaths later. A sparkling and translucent crystal river, which seemed to be composed of countless crystals that were millions of times tougher than diamonds, suddenly rushed out from the top of Luo Fan's head and went straight to the back of his head. It poured straight into the 5 halos, wrapped around the 3 flowers, and broke through the barrier of the halos. With a turn, it rose up from behind the halos and went straight into the mysterious black hole above. At this moment, the crystal river was being strangled by a boundless power the moment it rushed into the cave. It was trying to completely wipe out the crystal river that had entered the cave. However, every single one of the countless crystals on the crystal river was so sturdy and perfect. No matter how the world-shaking power that could shred any living being to pieces tried to kill them, they were not damaged in the slightest. Instead, they became even more crystal clear during the process. The aura that they gave off, which seemed to be indestructible and unscathed, became more and more obvious. Every single crystal became even more crystal clear, and they continued to rush into the cave. Under the endless stream of crystal, the halos behind Luo Fan's head suddenly trembled and left the back of his head. Together with the crystal river, it flowed along the crystal river, and as if it was being carried, it also rushed into the cave. The moment the 5 halos entered the cave, Luo Fan's body suddenly trembled. The blankness in his eyes became even more shocking, and he had even broken through a certain limit in an instant. Instead, he seemed to be shining brilliantly, as if his mind was extremely focused. All living beings that were enveloped by his eyes would feel as if his eyes had seen through all secrets in an instant. Even Yen Kong, who had not broken through back then, would not be an exception. However, this was only because things would move in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. In reality, at that moment there were countless thoughts, information, principles, and mysteries in Luo Fan's mind. They flowed and fused madly. All of this made him lose all sense of the outside world a long time ago. Even though his eyes were still open, it was only because he had completely lost control over his body. If he could control his body and his eyelids, he would have closed his eyes a long time ago. Those thoughts, information, principles, and mysteries were extremely unfamiliar to Luo Fan, but he knew where they came from. All of this was transmitted from the cave behind him through the 5 halos behind his head. The cave was none other than a passageway that led to the Great Tao. The countless thoughts, information, principles, and mysteries that flowed out of the cave were what he had obtained from the Great Tao. If he had survived that tribulation and resisted the crushing and obliterating force of that power, then it would have been absolutely impossible for this cave to appear. No matter how strong Luo Fan's will was, and no matter how much his cultivation had improved, it would be the same. Because that power would directly seal the cave. No matter what existence it was, as long as it wanted to peep into the cave, it would be crushed and obliterated by that power. But it was different now. At this moment, Luo Fan had not only survived the annihilation of that tribulation, but during the last wave of counterattack, he had used the magic treasure he had refined to directly devour and fuse the essence of that power, allowing that treasure of the immortal path that had just become a magic treasure to break through its limit and become a primordial unity treasure, an incredible realm that would have taken tens of thousands of years of incessant refining. Under such circumstances, because the magic treasure had fused with the power that guarded the cave, it naturally had some kind of inexplicable affinity with the cave, allowing it to naturally appear above Luo Fan's head. Or perhaps, from another perspective, it was because the disappearance of that power caused a slight gap to appear between the Grand Tao and the magic treasure, and it naturally formed a passageway that allowed the cave to appear. The two seemed to be different, yet they were the same in essence. At this moment, all of Luo Fan's thoughts were placed within the countless thoughts, information, principles, and profundities that surged ceaselessly into his mind, and he was ceaselessly searching for the profundities of the all-heaven immortal realm that he required. This process was simply extravagant to the point all the cultivators that were aware of it wished for nothing more than to directly crush and obliterate Luo Fan. If other cultivators wanted to comprehend even the simplest and crudest profundities of the Grand Tao, they would have to exhaust boundless energy and spend countless years in order to obtain a slight comprehension. At this moment, Luo Fan seemed like he was buying cabbages on the side of the road, and he was picking and choosing the various principles and profundities that they had to exhaust boundless effort to comprehend, and was disdainful of them. How could this make the other cultivators feel at ease? However, if Luo Fan knew what they were thinking, he would probably feel even more disdain towards them. Even though he was extravagantly enjoying the qualification to pick and choose the profundities of the Grand Tao, the price he'd paid for this qualification was so great that it exceeded the imagination of ordinary people. He'd ceaselessly endured pain that could instantly kill any ordinary cultivator during those 100,000 years of time, and it was only because of this that he possessed such a formidable will that surpassed his limits. After that, he'd even suffered the obliteration of the energy that could destroy the universe, and he'd almost perished. If it wasn't for his luck being extremely good, Anti-Zo would have been obliterated by that energy. These experiences that were sufficient to completely obliterate any trace of a cultivator's existence allowed him to possess such a seemingly extravagant qualification at this moment. If they had a choice, then how many cultivators would be willing to exchange all these experiences for this seemingly extravagant qualification at this moment? Amidst this extravagant selection, Luo Fan's cultivation realm started to slowly increase. Even though this sort of increase was so slow, it was only relative to the realm of 3 flowers converged and 5 cheese converged. If this increase in cultivation realm was placed on an ordinary living being, it would definitely be enough for a living being without any cultivation to attain the golden core realm. Such a speed of increase would definitely make all cultivators go mad with envy. However, to Luo Fan it was still too slow. With a single thought, the will that had already burrowed into the cave and was continuously searching for all sorts of mysteries in the depths of the great Tao suddenly trembled and expanded by several times. The strength and speed of its penetration also increased by several times. Along with this change, the thoughts, information, principles, and profundities that flowed endlessly into Luo Fan's mind and consciousness increased by several times. In practically an instant, it filled Luo Fan's mind and consciousness, causing Luo Fan to feel that his mind and consciousness were so full that there were even signs of it not being effective when he circulated it. However, it was only a slight sign. The endurance of Luo Fan's mind and consciousness was beyond imagination. He did not even need to adjust himself to be able to convert all of this, allowing most of his mind and consciousness to continue accepting the thoughts, information, principles, and profundities that flowed in from the outside world. So that's how it is. So there's still such a mystery. So that's how it can be. Almost at every moment, all sorts of thoughts would suddenly appear in Luo Fan's mind. His knowledge increased with every moment, and the gains he gained at every moment were comparable to what he would gain after several years of dedicated cultivation. This process continued without end. In the blink of an eye, 3 days and 3 nights had passed. During these 3 days and 3 nights, the crystal river that flowed out of the top of Luo Fan's head did not stop at all, nor did it show any signs of stopping. It continued to flow out and flow into the cave above his head. On the other hand, there were countless thoughts, information, principles, and profundities ceaselessly surging into his mind at all times, and they were for him to choose at will. Even though the profundities of the golden immortal realm that he required didn't appear amongst them, the other profundities that were available for him to choose had already allowed his attainments to improve by a few times compared to 3 days ago. It was even to the extent that he felt that his attainments from the Triflower Converge and 5-Chi unification technique had risen to its peak in this short period of time, and he faintly felt that he might obtain an unimaginable breakthrough at any moment. It was even to the extent that he had the feeling that he didn't have to strive for it in order to comprehend the profundities of the golden immortal realm at any moment and become a golden immortal realm cultivator. Luo Fan did not doubt this feeling at all. It could even be said that even if he hadn't obtained such an enormous improvement in his attainments, he was extremely confident that he didn't have to strive for it in order to comprehend the profundities of the golden immortal realm and become a golden immortal realm cultivator. This was something that had never changed in his heart. However, he was clearly aware that it was absolutely impossible for it to be a short amount of time. No matter how hard he worked, being able to break through this barrier within a few million years was already an extraordinary genius that possessed unimaginable fortuitous encounters. It was precisely because he possessed this extremely clear understanding that he allowed his will to start charging towards the Grand Tao after he possessed it, and after he overcame the tribulation, he didn't hold back at all and placed all his will into seeking the Grand Tao. The more he sought the Grand Tao, the more Luo Fan felt the vastness of the Grand Tao, and he sensed how crude the various profundities of the Grand Tao he'd comprehended in the past were. It was even to the extent that he'd faintly made preparations to fight here for a long period of time, and he was prepared to stay here for a few years or even a few dozen years to search for the profundities of the golden immortal realm. At the instant he made preparations to fight here for a long period of time, his heart suddenly jerked, and he felt as if some sort of indescribable profundity that was extremely closely related to him had entered his mind through the 5 circles of light behind him. At this instant, he understood that the profundity of the golden immortal realm had appeared before he could even locate it. As soon as he understood this, how could Luo Fan still have any hesitation? With a single thought, he directly swept aside all the thoughts, information, principles, and profundities in his mind, and focused all his attention on the wondrous existence that had just entered his mind. In an instant, an indescribable aura of perfection filled his mind, then spread out, filling his mind, filling his mud-pill palace, filling his knowledge sea, filling his entire soul, and filling his entire body. In a trance, boundless light flashed past Luo Fan's eyes. The light flashed so quickly that it was equivalent to 100 billion hours of footage from a movie flashing past his eyes in just an instant. Such speed was unimaginable for ordinary beings and even ordinary cultivators. In fact, Luo Fan had only been able to barely make out a few fragments of it before. However, for the current Luo Fan, these lights and shadows could not exert any pressure on him at all. No matter how the lights and shadows flickered, no matter how fast they flickered, he could see all the lights and shadows clearly the moment they flashed past. He even had enough thoughts to comprehend the various wonderful scenes described in the lights and shadows. What the light displayed was none other than the various indescribable perfections of perfection. These perfections came in all shapes and sizes. Some were as simple as a circle, while others were so complex that they encompassed the entire earth and the universe, encompassing countless worlds. If these were only fragments, they would naturally be extremely obscure. Only those with unimaginable talent and cultivation would be able to comprehend them. However, at this moment, the light flashed so quickly and densely, and the similarity between them had reached an indescribable level. In a trance, the perfections were no longer concealed, and directly poured into the minds of those who saw the light. After a few breaths, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. So that's how it is. When he came to a sudden realization, the crystal river that had rushed out from the top of his head suddenly trembled and instantly flowed backwards. Moreover, the speed at which it flowed backwards was several hundred times faster than the speed at which it had rushed out. In just a few dozen breaths, The crystal river that had poured into the cave for 3 days and 3 nights had completely flowed backwards, leaving the cave and bringing the circle of light and the 3 flowers back into the top of Luo Fan's head. After the crystal river left, the cave shook slightly and suddenly shrunk. Without any pause, it shrunk into a small dot and disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared in the first place. At this time, Luo Fan no longer cared about the cave. He sat cross-legged in the void, and his body suddenly shone brightly, revealing endless splendor. This brilliance was extremely gentle, faintly discernible and faintly discernible. After it appeared, it penetrated deep into the void of the universe, as if it had fused with the void. It illuminated tens of thousands of light-years from far away, shrouding the void within this range in this brilliance. An indescribable feeling of perfection was born. Everything within the range of tens of thousands of light-years, all energy, and even the void of the universe were tainted and affected by this feeling of perfection. This taint and influence made the matter, energy, and the void seem to come alive. Although there were no abnormal changes, the feeling of being alive was extremely obvious. No living being could ignore it. Following this, strange sounds of the great Tao surged in the space within tens of thousands of light-years. All sorts of light and shadows that described the perfections that had appeared before Luo Fan's eyes appeared faintly and changed. Chapter 672. Seeking the Great Tao. Seeking the Great Tao. Chapter 672. Chapter 633. Grand Luo. As these changes occurred, Luo Fan slowly stood up and flicked his robes gently as if he was dusting himself. However, as he did so, the mysterious light, sounds of the ways, and strange lights that blanketed the world and engulfed an area of several 10,000 light-years instantly vanished as if they had never appeared in the first place. In a flash, a sense of perfection, freedom slowly seeped out from Luo Fan's body. As he stood there, he seemed to be the center of the entire universe, the center of the entire world. It was as if the entire world and the entire universe were revolving around him, existing around him. With a slight lift of his hand, the entire star system seemed to tremble slightly. It was as if that small movement of his had shaken the entire star system, causing it to change along with his movement. So, this is the Grand Luo. Luo Fan smiled. His eyes shone with a strange light as he calmly said something that was almost identical to what he had said before. However, compared to what he had said before, what he said now was like a definition. It was as if he had only created the Grand Luo now, unlike before when he had only discovered it and guessed it. A strange change instantly spread out, and the entire galaxy underwent some inexplicable change in an instant. The rules of the planets, the way the central star burned, and the way the countless energies and energies that drifted around the star system flowed naturally changed. This change was extremely mysterious, causing the entire galaxy to be filled with an indescribable liveliness in an instant. This life force did not directly give birth to life, but instead formed an environment that was extremely suitable for life. It was as if in that instant, some strange life form could be born in the void of the star system at any time. It was even more so for the planets that had atmospheres to begin with. At that moment, the planets that were originally unsuitable for life were instantly filled with endless life. Although they did not immediately give birth to life, they had reached a certain threshold. With just the slightest change, they would be able to give birth to life forms that were suitable for the planet's environment and completely different from the known life forms. Earth's universe was so vast that the number of planets in it was simply indescribable with numbers. All sorts of strange environments naturally existed. In this case, there was more than one type of environment suitable for the birth of living beings. Just like the various secular studies on Earth before Luo Fan transmigrated, there might also be non-carbon-based life in this universe, such as silicon-based, oxygen-based life, and so on. Based on that, every planet in Earth's universe, and even the stars, could be said to be suitable for the birth of life. It was not just planets like Earth that could give birth to life. Of course, that was in theory, but there was a huge difference between theory and reality. In reality, the chances of a planet giving birth to life were so low that it was impossible in the mundane world. The number of conditions required was enough to make an ordinary person or even an ordinary cultivator collapse. For example, the planet that Luo Fan's spiritual sense clone had refined was already a suitable environment for the birth of certain carbon-based lifeforms, but if Luo Fan wanted to truly transform it into a planet with carbon-based lifeforms, he would need to gather vitality through various complicated methods, spend a long time, and expend a huge amount of energy before he could barely create it. Even if he could create it, the life forms that could survive in that environment had to be extremely primitive and had an unimaginably strong ability to adapt to the environment. At that moment, after comprehending the mysteries of the zenith heaven, all of this was no longer difficult for Luo Fan. With just a slight thought in his mind, the hundreds of planets in this galaxy, and even the star at the center naturally underwent a subtle change. The factors that were originally not suitable for the birth of life on these planets and stars were all changed, and the extremely small probability of the birth of life, that was practically impossible in his opinion, had instantly increased by countless times to the point that it was practically certain. It could be imagined that even if Luo Fan didn't do anything, this galaxy would definitely become a sacred ground for life after a few years, and the hundreds of planets and the star at the center would give birth to at least hundreds of different life forms. Moreover, these hundreds of different life forms weren't the different types of animals and plants on Earth, but the types of carbon-based life forms, silicon-based life forms, and oxygen-based life forms. Making a galaxy undergo such an unbelievable change could be said to be the divine ability of creation and the ability of a saint. Moreover, this was only the result of Luo Fan's small test after becoming a golden immortal realm cultivator. Yes, after a few days of ceaselessly seeking the grand Tao and comprehending the profundities of the zenith heaven just now, Luo Fan had broken through the realms of condensed chi and spirit converged together, and he'd become a golden immortal realm cultivator. It could be said that at the instant he comprehended the profundities of the zenith heaven, his cultivation had improved by countless times, and at this moment it was already equivalent to attaining the supreme realm of attaining the golden immortal Tao fruit. The golden immortal realm represented perfection. The profundities of the all-heaven realm were profundities that had attained perfection. When one attained this realm, all divine abilities, techniques, and the might of the martial Tao would be able to attain perfection and transform into the laws of the Tao. With a single thought, one could utilize them at will, and the impossible could become possible. Creation and creation were extremely ordinary. Even though changing the environment of this entire star system was troublesome, it was only a single thought to him. Even though changing the environment of this galaxy with a single thought seemed to be extremely easy, Luo Fan instantly understood the limits of what he could accomplish at this moment. He obtained an extremely clear understanding of the might of the divine abilities he possessed after attaining the golden immortal realm. My luck is truly heaven-defying. I was actually able to survive until now. After he understood the might of the divine abilities he possessed, Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh with emotion. He naturally didn't sigh with emotion because he was able to rely on his extraordinary will to seek the grand Tao and comprehend the profundities of the zenith heaven, and it was instead because he was sighing with emotion when he encountered Yen Kong, who'd attained the Buddha realm. He encountered the spiritual sense that was born from the energy of a golden immortal realm cultivator, encountered the palm of an existence that was obviously a golden immortal realm cultivator at least, yet he was actually able to escape and ascend into the heavens. Moreover, it was even to the extent that he obtained countless benefits that allowed him to directly break through his limits and comprehend the profundities of the zenith heaven to become a golden immortal realm cultivator. The reason he sighed with emotion was because he noticed that even though he'd just attained the golden immortal realm, he was countless times stronger than before. At this moment, facing himself before he'd broken through, he only needed a single thought or a single gaze to turn him who hadn't broken through into a pile of mush before he'd broken through into a pile of mush. His body, Tao, and soul would vanish. Moreover, if he worked hard, he might even be able to trace back to the source and directly attack his main body that was far away in the primordial world. Even though he couldn't kill his main body due to the distance between them being 2 universes apart, it was sufficient to cause his main body to suffer near-fatal injuries. Since he could do it, even if Yen Kong and the others he'd encountered before were slightly weaker, they would definitely be able to easily kill him. Under such circumstances, even though he'd stumbled along the way, he'd still managed to come this far in the end. Moreover, he'd even obtained considerable benefits from them, which directly made him who he was now. It was imaginable how heaven-defying his luck was. How could this not make him sigh with emotion? I didn't expect that there'd actually be a cultivator who could break through his limits and attain the golden immortal realm in this Dharma-ending era. At this moment, a faintly discernible voice suddenly pierced through the boundless void and infinite distance into Luo Fan's ears. When Luo Fan heard this voice, he didn't show any surprise on his face. Even his expression didn't change at all. He only smiled faintly. It's just a coincidence. If it wasn't for my good luck, I wouldn't have been able to obtain the divine ability I have now. Since you're all here, why don't you show yourselves? When he said these words, Luo Fan didn't use any divine ability at all. However, as soon as these words left his mouth, they naturally merged into the void and spread out through the karmic connection. They spread to several locations in the universe on Earth. The distance between each location was unknown as to how many light years away they were from each other. Haha! I didn't expect your senses to be so sharp right after you've just broken through. You're actually able to sense us, as expected of someone who could attain the golden immortal realm in the Dharma-ending era. At this moment, another voice came into Luo Fan's ears. What a pity! If such a genius could be born in the age of the saints, becoming a saint wouldn't be an illusion. But in this Dharma-ending era, he can only wait for death. Another voice joined in. Old bastard, can't you say something nice for once? He's just broken through, and you're already pouring cold water on him. How disappointing. Another voice came into Luo Fan's ears, and it was reprimanding the first voice. It wasn't just one person who was spying on Luo Fan from the side, but there were several of them. Luo Fan wasn't surprised at first. After all, the phenomenon he'd caused when he became a connate golden immortal realm covered an area of tens of thousands of light years. Compared to the entire universe, even though Earth was negligible, it could still affect more than half of the galaxy he was in. Such an enormous phenomenon was sufficient to disturb an extremely large area of Earth's universe, so he would absolutely not believe that it hadn't drawn the attention of the connate golden immortal realm cultivators that still existed in Earth's universe. It was precisely because of this that he wasn't surprised when someone utilized some sort of strange divine ability to speak into his ears, and he felt it to be a matter of course instead. Because it was within his expectations, and he would be surprised instead if no one spoke. But at this moment these voices were speaking successively, and it was even to the extent that there were signs of more and more people, so he couldn't help but feel surprised. Connate golden immortal realm cultivators existed in Earth's universe, and this was something that Luo Fan was aware of since a long time ago. It was even to the extent that he'd seen someone break through in the past. However, there were so many connate golden immortal realm cultivators in the space of Earth's universe that was disturbed by his breakthrough, and this caused him to be extremely surprised. It's already the Dharma-ending era now, so why are there still so many connate golden immortal realm cultivators existing? This was the only thought in Luo Fan's mind. At this moment, there were a few more existences that joined the conversation. In total, the number of connate golden immortal realm cultivators that spoke to Luo Fan from countless light years away in Earth's universe had increased to an entire 18. On the other hand, the reason these 18 connate golden immortal realm cultivators spoke seemed to be merely to greet Luo Fan and announce their existence. Thus, their words didn't contain any substance, and they merely spoke a single sentence before falling silent. After these 18 connate golden immortal realm cultivators finished speaking and waited for quite some time, Luo Fan finally said, "I've been wholeheartedly cultivating, and I actually didn't know that there were so many fellow Taoists in the universe. I'm truly delighted. However, I wonder which fellow Taoist made a move against me 100,000 years ago? Will you be able to show yourself and settle the karma?" His words were still transmitted along the karmic connection, and it remained throughout the universe and directly entered into the ears of those 18 connate golden immortal realm cultivators. Space froze slightly when they heard Luo Fan's words. After a long time, no words entered into Luo Fan's ears, and it seemed as if these connate golden immortal realm cultivators had moved their attention away and weren't willing to talk to Luo Fan any longer. After quite some time, a voice entered into Luo Fan's ears. However, it wasn't one of the 18 connate golden immortal realm cultivators that spoke just now, and it was another voice that Luo Fan had never heard before, but its aura was slightly familiar. "I never expected that the ant from 100,000 years ago would actually be able to surpass his limits and become a golden immortal realm cultivator today. Since you want to settle the karma with me, then come find me yourself," said the voice. The voice carried an air of supremacy and suppression. It was like a divine king that sat in the 9 heavens was talking to an ant that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws at him. This person's aura had been entangled with Luo Fan for 100,000 years, and even now, it was still entangled with Luo Fan's consciousness clone. It was the voice of the person that had slapped Luo Fan. As soon as the voice finished speaking, the planet that Luo Fan's consciousness clone had refined suddenly shook violently. Under the impact of an indescribably powerful force, countless cracks appeared on the surface of the planet. Lava, black mist, baleful aura, and underground fire surged out from the cracks, instantly destroying the ecosystem that had just been established on the planet. The various lives that had just appeared on the planet were instantly wiped out. Luo Fan frowned, and with a thought, the changes on the planet calmed down. The surface of the planet that had collapsed instantly gathered together, and the ecosystem of the entire planet was instantly rebuilt. In fact, it was even more stable and perfect than before. Although the countless living beings that had died previously did not come back to life, it was only a matter of time before they were reborn. "I didn't think it through." After doing all that, Luo Fan sighed inwardly. The reason why the planet had changed so suddenly was because that existence had transmitted his will here and discovered the state of the power he had sent out. He knew that his spiritual sense doppelganger was using that power to refine his will and improve himself, so he directly detonated that power. While causing heavy damage to his spiritual sense doppelganger, it also caused great damage to the planet that his spiritual sense doppelganger had refined. Although it did not completely collapse, it would normally take at least hundreds of millions of years for life to be born. Of course, the damage was nothing to Luo Fan, who could change the environment of the entire galaxy with just a thought. He only needed to think about it, and the damage to his spiritual sense doppelganger and the planet itself would disappear in an instant. Even after the destruction, it would become even more perfect. At this moment, the consciousness clone's will was crystal clear, and it was countless times more powerful than before. Although it still could not catch up to his body, and could not directly surpass the limits of cultivation like his body, it had reached the peak that was only a step away from surpassing, and its power and abilities were countless times more powerful than before. This was also natural. At this moment, Luo Fan had already become a connate Grand Luo, and with a thought, there would be boundless connate grand Luo-level energy constantly cleansing his consciousness clone. The effect was naturally many times better than the force from before, and that was why he could achieve this. In just an instant, his consciousness clone's will had already been improved beyond imagination. It was an almost inconceivable thing. All of these changes occurred in an instant. After that, Luo Fan said, "I'll naturally come back, and I definitely won't make you wait for long." As he spoke, he'd already sensed the location of that person through the karma link, and he'd even seen that person's appearance. When the 3 Chi's converged prominence was completed, Luo Fan already possessed the ability to sense all existences that were related to him through karma link. After the 5 Chi's converged prominence was completed, this ability was greatly improved. Although there was no qualitative change, the range of his senses was over 100 times greater than before. Of course, the range wasn't the range of space, but the range of the karma link. For example, a person could only form a karma link with Luo Fan after passing through several layers of indirect transmission, and these layers of indirect transmission were the range of the karma link. For example, a certain existence would form a karma link with him after a certain number of years, and this number of years would be the range of the karma link. For example, a certain existence could conceal the karma link with him when it was powerful to a certain extent, and the extent of its strength would be the range of the karma link. All of these were the factors that limited the profound senses, and it was the direction that his senses should be improved. After the 5 Chi's converged prominence was completed, even though the range of Luo Fan's senses had increased by 100 times, he still didn't really dare rely on this sort of sense to sense that person. After all, the karma link was mutual, and this sort of sense was mutual as well. To a golden immortal realm cultivator, so long as Luo Fan sensed him, then he would definitely be able to sense Luo Fan as well, unless Luo Fan exceeded the range of his senses. Thus, if Luo Fan tried to sense that person after he'd completed the 5 Chi's converged prominence technique, then even though he might be able to find out where that person was and what appearance that person had, it would definitely arouse that person's vigilance. At that time, if that person were to launch another palm strike at Luo Fan, then how would Luo Fan endure it?